Chapter 74. Don't tell me that there's nothing else to talk about between us other than money. I remember you liked to come to the ranch, where I worked when you were a child. Back then you could ride a horse and catch sheep. Burke Dollar laughed at himself when he heard the woman's words. Then, as if he was talking to the woman, or to himself, he muttered in a low voice. Don't talk about it. You know, that was when I was a child. Now that I've grown up, I have my own life. If I want to live, the most basic thing is money. I don't want to be like you, poor and destitute all my life. I can't even pay alimony after a divorce. However, the girl was even more resolute. She didn't give Burke Dollar a chance to finish his words. She waved her hand and shouted loudly. Burke Dollar couldn't help but be stunned when he heard her words. Then, the self-deprecating expression on his face became even more serious. Who said he'll be poor and destitute all his life? The people who work in my manor may not earn less than Moses Adams, who's sitting in the house. Hearing this, Jiang Hai finally couldn't help it. Although he didn't like to meddle in other people's business, he felt that it was time for him, the boss, to make a move. Yes, Burke Dollar's income was indeed not much now. An income of $750 a week. That's only $39,000 a year. It's not even as good as the middle class in the United States. Don't forget, Jiang Hai's profits haven't been factored in yet, including water, electricity, internet, food, drinks, and accommodation. All of these don't cost any money. Adding all of these together, it's about $10,000. The most important thing was that the $39,000 was a fixed salary. When Jiang Hai's cows made money, according to the situation in the United States, they would naturally receive dividends. The amount of dividends would be divided according to the mood of the manor owner. However, if they really made more than $1 billion for him, Jiang Hai wouldn't be stingy with the million or so. When the time came, it would be easy for each of them to make more than $100,000. Plus the basic salary. It wouldn't be a problem to make $200,000 a year. The most important thing was that this money could be saved. It was precisely because of this prospect that these people worked so hard. Even when Jiang Hai wasn't watching them, they still worked so hard. What was the reason? Of course, it was for the real money. Therefore, when Jiang Hai heard this, he immediately stood up and refuted the woman. However, after stepping forward, Jiang Hai immediately regretted his decision. The reason for that was because he was truly embarrassed. I'm sorry. Seeing Jiang Hai's figure standing there, the father and daughter were obviously stunned. Then the girl named Penelope lowered her head and walked past Jiang Hai. As for Burke Dollar, he sighed and walked to Jiang Hai's side. Then the two men looked at each other and walked to the front door of the villa. Sitting there in the cold wind, Burke Dollar told Jiang Hai a story. To be exact, it was his true story. Burke Dollar was an old cowboy. As mentioned before, he learned cowboy skills when he was very young. Then he started to become a cowboy. At the end of the 20th century, the cowboy industry was actually quite popular. Especially in the East, he made some money in those years. Later, like most ranchers, he bought a piece of land and built a ranch. But because of bad investment, he went bankrupt in 2003. It was also that year that his wife and daughter divorced him. And he lived a life of a bachelor and paying off his debts. It took him 5 years to pay off his debts. But then came the financial crisis. It was difficult for him to support himself as a cowboy, let alone do other things. At that time, his daughter also went to college. Unfortunately, as a father, he could not afford a penny for his daughter's college education. Since then, his wife and daughter, who were originally distant from him, became more and more distant from him. In their opinion, Burke Dollar was a good-for-nothing. Compared to Burke Dollar's wife who worshipped money, Burke Dollar's daughter might be more resentful of him for failing to live up to her expectations. However, Burke Dollar's ex-wife had instilled in her from a young age that being a cowboy wouldn't make any money, so she became increasingly indifferent to her father. Listening to Burke Dollar's words, Jiang Hai touched his chin, although it was somewhat one-sided. Burke Dollar did not hate his ex-wife, because he knew that everyone had the right to pursue their own happiness. Since she thought that she could not find happiness with him, then let her go. He heard that she was now in New York, married to a financier, and lived a good life. At least in terms of material things, She was much happier than when she was with him. So Burke Dollar did not say much, but his daughter's words made him very uncomfortable. Don't worry. I don't know if being a cowboy can make money, but I know that as long as you work for me, at least in terms of making money, you don't have to worry. After Burke Dollar finished speaking, Jiang Hai was silent for a moment. Then he got up and returned to the house. He quietly took out 2 bottles of beer and handed one to Burke Dollar. Then he took a big gulp. Taking a deep breath, Jiang Hai said to Burke Dollar. He was not confident in himself, but in his blood. Then I'll bet on you, boss. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Burke Dollar laughed and said to Jiang Hai. He did not know if it was because of the cow he killed today that gave him confidence. Speaking of this, the two could not help but smile at each other. And then they drank again. Generally speaking, this night's banquet was a happy one. When it was about 10 o'clock in the evening, the banquet was officially over. The driver drove the car and sent Murray Smith, who was very grateful, back to Winthrop before returning to Boston. But before leaving, Jiang Hai told Moses Adams about his tax payment. But for Moses Adams, he was a professional lawyer, not a professional accountant. But lawyers and accountants had a close relationship, so he had a way to contact an accountant to calculate Jiang Hai's tax payment. But at this time, it was still a long time before he had to pay the tax. The tax filing was in April every year, and it was only November now. It would be in time to prepare the tax filing in March next year. Now Jiang Hai told him about it just to remind him. After all, these things were very important. After tonight's banquet, Jiang Hai's manor once again entered into a peaceful life. Of course, this so-called peace was only on the surface. Every day, everyone's life was very ordinary but very fulfilling. Jiang Hai's daily routine was very simple. Every morning, he would wake up and run laps, then have breakfast. In the morning, he would practice the martial arts that Belle taught him, then have lunch. In the afternoon, he would either watch a basketball game at home, play games, or lie on the balcony on the second floor to read novels or surf the internet. In the evening, he would have dinner. After dinner, later in the evening, he would use the extra blood in his body to transform the manor's pasture. Under Jiang Hai's slow transformation, the current pasture in the manor was finally completed. Anyway, he did not have many friends in this country, so it was not bad to live like this every day. What Edward Anderson did every day was to drive an open boat to the open sea to see if anyone stole Jiang Hai's fish. Of course, every few days, they would go out together to catch fish. But these fish were not to be sold, but to be eaten. Just like the beef cattle in Jiang Hai's manor, now was not the time to sell them. At the same time, Ai Dehua was also preparing to raise fish next year, or the day after tomorrow. First, he needed to know where there were no corals, and where there were better places to raise fish. Jiang Hai did not know these things, so he could only rely on himself. Sometimes Philemon or Belle would help him, and naturally, Jiang Hai would also help. When they went out to sea together, it was much better to have a companion. As for the lobster that Jiang Hai wanted to eat, he had never heard of it. The weather was too cold now, so fishing for lobsters in the water was a happy thing. Jiang Hai did not want to reveal too much of his skills in front of others, so he did not eat it. However, the problem of beef, wagyu, and countless prawns and crabs could be temporarily postponed. The most busy ones were Robbins and the other cowboys, but they felt very happy now. What these people had to do every day was to drive the cattle and sheep out of the cowshed, walk around outside, and then rush back before dark. As the weather became colder and colder, in fact, the cattle in the nearby manors were already ready to fatten up. However, Robbins and others would still drive a circle of cattle with the help of the cattle dog every day, mainly because the pasture in Jiang Hai's manor did not wither on a large scale because of the arrival of winter. This made Robbins and others very surprised and also very happy. After all, dry pasture is not as nutritious as fresh pasture. These pasture that was nourished by Jiang Hai's blood can be said to be the most nutritious grass in the world. Even in addition to eating grass, these cattle do not need too much fine feed to grow stronger and stronger. Robbins and others were happy to see these things in their eyes. Every day, they would think that if these cows looked the same as the one that was killed that day, then this manor would make a profit. And when that time comes, with Jiang Hai's generosity, they estimated that they wouldn't be disappointed. No one would be resistant to the green dollar. At least, the people in Jiang Hai's manor did not feel that way at the moment. Unknowingly, time passed slowly. The renovation project of Jiang Hai's manor inland was finally completed. Not only did he renovate all the pastures, but he also renovated the vegetable garden. The vegetables he ate recently tasted much better than before. But after all, it was already winter. However, Jiang Hai estimated that when he planted them again next year, they would taste better. This was also his confidence in his blood. In this leisurely life, the first heavy snow of the year quietly arrived. Today's second update is continuously delivered. Chapter 75. Boston was located in the northern hemisphere, and it was considered a cold zone. Due to the influence of the Atlantic monsoon, the city was relatively rainy and snowy. The annual average rainfall was 42 inches, which was 108 centimeters, and the snowfall was also 42 inches. In other words, the snow here was just like rain, and there was no accuracy, especially in Winthrop, because it is close to the Atlantic Ocean. Although there is a Gulf Stream, it is easy to have foggy days every spring and early summer. In early autumn, it is even easier to have hurricanes and tropical storms. Fortunately, Jiang Hai has not taken over this place at that time, and in winter, it is also easy to be affected by the northeast wind. Sometimes after a snowstorm, the snowfall can reach 20 inches, that is 50 centimeters. As soon as people go out, the snow is almost knee-deep, so overall, the weather here in Boston is not very satisfactory. Jiang Hai used to only pay attention to the fact that this is a treasure land that can make his scales grow more. But he completely forgot about the weather here. This day was originally the same as usual. After finishing his work during the day, Jiang Hai went back to sleep at night. But in the middle of the night, he was awakened by the cold. It must be known that with the current physical fitness of Jiang Hai, he was awakened by the cold. It can be seen how low the temperature is at this time. Getting up from the bed in a daze, Jiang Hai walked to the ventilation window in his room against the cold wind. He opened the curtains and looked outside. He saw the thumbnail-sized snowflakes falling from the air like cotton. The cold wind made the snowflakes float around Jiang Hai's manor. Jiang Hai poked his head out to take a look, and couldn't help but shrink his neck. At this time, in his sight, except for white, there is only white. At a glance, the lawn, the parking lot in front of the villa, the distant woods, and even the farther coastline are all covered by snowflakes. Who is it? It's snowing so hard. Looking at the scene in front of him, Jiang Hai whispered. When the cold wind blew, he couldn't help but shrink his neck again. The wind poured in from the window. He felt that his balls in his pajamas were about to be frozen. Then he cursed and closed the window. He is not a person who has never seen snow. It snows in Bingqing every year, and sometimes it is much heavier than this. He has seen heavier snow, so there is nothing to be curious about. After closing the window, Jiang Hai returned to bed and continued to sleep with the quilt. It was a quiet night. The next morning, when Jiang Hai woke up, he found that the heavy snow outside had finally stopped. But although the snow stopped, the whistling cold wind did not stop. Everyone knows that the wind at the seaside is very strong. Jiang Hai's manor is by the seaside, so the wind is naturally not weak. The strong wind is like a snow machine, constantly picking up the snowflakes that fell on the ground. When the sun shines, the snow below will melt, and the snowflakes will become ice cubes. If Jiang Hai wants to go out, he will have to jump out of the window. Even at this time, it is still early in the morning. Outside the eaves of Jiang Hai's second-floor room, there are countless small ice cubes. This is the snow that was melted by the sun in the morning. Before it could turn into water, it was frozen into ice. This situation is very common for Jiang Hai. When he was young, he used to eat this thing. But now he doesn't dare to eat it, because it is very dirty. Hey boss, you are up. At this moment, a rough voice came from downstairs. Jiang Hai stood in front of the second-floor windowsill and looked down. He saw Luo Binsi, Harriman and Ai Dehua in the distance. They were driving a small car out of the warehouse in the distance. This small car looks like a forklift, but it is much smaller than a normal forklift. Jiang Hai has seen it in the warehouse before. According to Luo Binsi, this is called a small snow forklift. It is also left by the previous owner. Usually, the front shovel is removed, and it can be used as a tractor to plow the land. When necessary, the shovel can be installed, and the snow can be shoveled. In the past, Jiang Hai did not know much about this thing. Now it seems that the machine was specially bought to deal with the current situation. Wait for me. I will go down and help. Looking at the three people coming over, Jiang Hai also called upstairs, and then went to the first floor. After washing his face and brushing his teeth, Jiang Hai turned up his clothes. Although his physical fitness is good now, it does not mean that he is not afraid of the cold. In fact, the weather in the north is colder, but the northerners are also more afraid of the cold. Basically, people like Jiang Hai, if in the country, would be ahead in the north, but in the south, he would be frozen like a dog. In a place without heating, he really doesn't know how to live well. But now Jiang Hai's room is still very comfortable, but to go out, he still needs to be fully armed. But when he opened the closet, he couldn't help but smack his teeth. Before it snowed, Jiang Hai really didn't feel too cold. After all, when he got up in the morning to run, it would be a little cold at first, but as he ran, it warmed up. So before it snowed, Jiang Hai, a guy who stayed at home all day, didn't feel anything. But now, when he wanted to go out to work, he wanted to find thick clothes to wear. But he realized that he didn't seem to have winter clothes. When Jiang Hai left the country, he didn't bring any clothes with him. He wasn't short of money at that time, so he only brought a few pieces of clothing and threw away the rest. His current sportswear, and windbreaker were all bought after he arrived in the United States. Originally, these clothes, even if they weren't thick, at most, they could block the wind or be very comfortable when exercising. But now that Jiang Hai had to go out to work, wearing these clothes made him feel a little weak and flustered. Jiang Hai was going out to work, but there was no other way. He didn't have any other clothes to wear now. After thinking about it, he wore a sweater inside, then a hoodie outside, and the thickest windbreaker outside. Even if he was fully armed, he didn't have many pants. He wore a pair of sweatpants and outdoor pants outside. He didn't know if it was cold, but he could only wear this at most. After everything was put on, he deliberately changed into a pair of his thickest hiking shoes and walked out. But as soon as he opened the door, Jiang Hai couldn't help but shiver. It was too cold. As for the two dogs, who were still very interested in the outside world, they also became well-behaved at this time. They just went out to the bathroom on the lawn, then returned to the house, lay on the carpet, and felt the geothermal heat under the floor under the carpet. But compared to the dogs, Jiang Hai and his employees didn't have such good benefits. "Hey boss, you're wearing really cool clothes." Seeing Jiang Hai's clothes, Robbins and others here couldn't help laughing. Now these guys are wearing thick clothes. Robbins was wearing a khaki woolen coat, a very thick coat, and Harriman was wearing a thin down jacket. Cotton-padded jackets were rarely worn here, because the people on their side had completed the transition. Although cotton-padded jackets were full of warmth, there were also many problems. One of the most important problems was that it was easy to get wet. This place was so close to the seaside. When the moisture returned, the cotton would weigh 3 pounds for no reason, and it would not have the effect of keeping warm. So here, the worst thing was to wear down jackets. As for Ai Dehua, a rich person, he was more particular about wearing leather clothes, but it was not a mink, but a leather coat made of bear skin. Once upon a time, bears, wolves, and other things were harmful in North America, just like killing wild boars when the country was just founded. These animals were not protected animals, so they were slaughtered in large numbers. The meat could be eaten, and the skin was naturally made into coats. But now the protection of wild animals in the United States is very good, such as bears, naturally, cannot be hunted casually. Of course, if it invades your home or invades the manor, then it is okay to kill it, but it needs the approval of the authorities. However, there are only a few such bears in the country. The bearskin jacket on Ai Dehua's body is obviously not new. It is more than 10 or 20 years old, but it is well taken care of by him. It is still shiny and new. Sitting in the car, Ai Dehua is half a head taller than Jiang Hai, And he is big like a bear, more like a person than a person. There are no clothes to wear. Let's work first. It will be hot in a while. When this place is cleaned up, I will buy thick clothes. Hearing Luo Binxi's words, Jiang Hai shrugged and said helplessly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Luo Binxi also laughed. Then several people began to get busy. First, they used a forklift to push out a snow path in the snow. Then they used shovels and brooms to move the snow to both sides, exposing the path in the middle. And they were done. You can't expect to get all the snow out of the entire ranch. Let's not talk about whether there is this manpower. The snow that has been frozen with the pasture is not so easy to get. Clear the snow in front of each house, and then clear the snow on the path. At this time, Jiang Hai can't help but envy those people in the suburbs today. At least they don't need to do this. The people living in the small villas in the suburbs, the snow in front of the door is cleaned by the cleaners, unlike Jiang Hai's manor, where he needs to do it himself. But fortunately, the snow has just finished, and no one stepped on it. The snow is not as thick as the legend says, only about 10 centimeters, so it is still relatively fast to clear it. A group of 4 people first shoveled the snow, then 2 used shovels and 2 used brooms. They are all big men. In a short time, the snow on the ground was almost cleared. In less than an hour, the main road on Jiang Hai's side has been cleared, and then they are busy clearing the snow on the residential area. Today's update is continuously delivered. Please support Little Faye, thank you. Chapter 76. Phew, it's finally done. Wiping the sweat on his forehead, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Since they got up in the morning, they had been busy all the way until now. Looking at the time, it was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Jiang Hai and his group had finally cleared all the snow on the main road, as well as the square. Looking at the snow on both sides of the road, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the manor was too big, it was a bit troublesome. Boss, hurry up and put it on. If you catch a cold later, it will be troublesome. Looking at Jiang Hai standing there wiping his sweat, Philemon couldn't help but take out a down jacket from the snow plow and threw it to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai didn't say much and put it on directly. As he thought, it was really cold when he first came out. But after he started working, his body was not cold anymore. But his feet were a little cold. However, at noon, Jiang Hai put on Belle's shoes, and his feet were much better. As for the clothes, he didn't rush to wear them for the time being. He continued to work in the afternoon. As for the people next to him, they changed. At the beginning, Robbins, Harriman, and Ai Dehua worked with Jiang Hai. The rest of the people, Philemon, Burke-Dollar, and Belle Lester, were busy in the manor. Don't forget, the cowshed, the horse barn, and the kennel also needed manpower. Feeding the cows, cleaning the cowshed, and ventilation were also troublesome. In the morning, almost all the work was done. Robbins and Harriman went to finish it. As for Ai Dehua, he stayed at the dock. There were also a lot of things to deal with at the dock, such as breaking the ice around the dock. Even if it was so cold today, he still had to patrol. Jiang Hai even wondered if he should buy a helicopter. If he always relied on an open boat to patrol, how long would it take? If there was a helicopter, it would be much faster. Jiang Hai knew this truth. How could Ai Dehua not know? But he didn't ask for this now, because Jiang Hai hadn't really started to raise fish yet. Although the ecological environment in the water was very good, there weren't too many fish at present. So for the time being, he didn't need to patrol several times a day, just once a day. This way it was still fun to use an open boat. Although his men were changed, Jiang Hai didn't rest and continued to work here. He had to admit that with his body similar to a perpetual motion machine, the speed of cleaning was indeed much faster. At first, he was still a little unfamiliar, but as he gradually became familiar with it, the speed of cleaning the snow also slowly became faster. Originally, according to Luo Binxi's estimation, they would only be able to finish cleaning before the sun set at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Unexpectedly, they were already done cleaning at around 3 o'clock. Holding the tools, Jiang Hai sat on the snow plow over there. Even if he was in good health now, he wasn't unrestrained. After working for a day, he was actually quite tired. Boss, you should buy a cotton padded coat. You don't know how unscrupulous the doctors in the United States are. You don't have Social Security now. If you really catch a cold, they will make you vomit blood. Philip looked at Jiang Hai beside him and kept talking. However, although he kept saying that it was a little annoying, what he said was the truth. Jiang Hai also knew that the clinics in the United States were really unscrupulous. If one caught a cold in the United States, there was no cold medicine here. Yes, there was no cold medicine. There was no way to buy it at all. If the people here caught a cold, if it was mild, they would take vitamins and anti-inflammatory drugs. If they had a fever, sometimes they would take some anti-inflammatory drugs and antibiotics. If it was more serious, they would go for an intravenous drip. Generally speaking, seeing a cold and seeing a dentist in the United States was very expensive. Basically, if one went in once, one wouldn't be able to come out intact without spending at least a few $1,000s. For example, there was no cold medicine in the country, and it was actually forbidden to bring cold medicine from the country abroad. This was because the cold medicine in the country contained ephedrine, which could be extracted to make people addicted. Therefore, if one caught a cold and had a fever abroad, and if one hadn't filed tax returns, it was indeed somewhat troublesome. Well, you should buy 2 sets. All right, Belle, your shoes are quite warm. Where did you get them? Jiang Hai tightened his down jacket and smiled. He didn't care about the down jacket he was wearing outside, but he was very interested in the shoes that Belle lent him. The shoes had high uppers, and the inside was made of fur. It was very hard, but it was very warm and at the same time very light. Most importantly, it was very breathable. Jiang Hai worked for the whole afternoon, and his feet were sweaty, but at this time, the shoes didn't feel wet at all. These shoes were given to me when I was still in the army. I saw that they were quite new, so I took them back. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Belle, who was sitting on the other side, couldn't help but smile and said. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but say, "Oh, so it's a military product. No wonder the quality is so good." But because it's a military product, he didn't ask much, because in his memory, real military products are not so easy to get. Maybe Belle understood Jiang Hai's meaning, so he continued to speak. "Boss, if you want to buy such shoes, the outdoor stores in the town sell them." "Huh, you can buy military products?" Hearing Belle's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be surprised and asked him with a curious face. "Yes, except for guns, other things can be bought in the town. Tactical vests, helmets, night vision goggles. As long as you want it, you can buy it here." Seeing Jiang Hai's surprised look, Belle also smiled and continued to speak to him. Hearing Belle's words, Jiang Hai blinked. "This is not bad." Quang quang. Puff. Just when Jiang Hai was hesitating whether to go to the outdoor stores in the town today, or wait until tomorrow, a sound came into Jiang Hai's ears. Hearing this sound, even Burke Dollar, Philip, and Belle in the car were stunned for a moment. Burke Dollar, who was driving, even directly pulled out a pistol from his back seat and held it in his hand. Then the 4 people looked at each other, and Jiang Hai decided to go and take a look. When they came to the place where the sound came from, they couldn't help but laugh at themselves, because the place where the sound came from was none other than the abandoned swimming pool. And the creature that made the sound was none other than Jiang Hai's shark. The swimming pool is not the sea. The sea can't be frozen, but the swimming pool can't. After last night and today's cooling, the surface of the swimming pool has been frozen with a thin layer of ice. Sharks are different from most fish. Some sharks can rest and sleep at the bottom of the water, but some sharks can't. They need to swim all the time to let their gills filter the oxygen in the water. Jiang Hai's sand tiger shark is the latter. The small space makes it very uncomfortable. And today, Jiang Hai and the others didn't come to feed it, so it broke the ice by itself. "You're really good at acting." Looking at the sand tiger shark under the water, because it felt that Jiang Hai was coming, Jiang Hai couldn't help but chuckle. This sand tiger shark was only about 3 meters long when it was fished, but now, after being fed by Jiang Hai's blood during this period and having enough food supply, it has grown to nearly 4 meters long. If it was discovered by some oceanographers, it would probably cause a lot of trouble, because the largest sand tiger shark is about 3.5 meters long. Now Jianghai's sand tiger shark has clearly exceeded the limit of sand tiger shark, but they are not too clear about this. Looking at the big shark in front of him, Jianghai thought for a moment and said to the people around him, "Forget it, it's winter. It's troublesome to raise it here, and I have to break the ice for it every day. Why don't we just put it back in the sea?" "Boss, you don't want to eat it?" Hearing Jianghai's words, $1 couldn't help but laugh. They didn't forget that Jianghai first caught this shark to eat it. Hearing his words, Jianghai also chuckled. In fact, he still wanted to eat a shark. After all, he had never eaten this thing before. But after raising it for so long, it was impossible to say that he had no feelings for it. So Jianghai decided to let it go. As for whether it would leave after he let it go, Jianghai wasn't worried. After all, this shark had drunk his blood. In a sense, this shark was related to him by blood. It was his subordinate and pet. Looking at it, he knew that it had been almost domesticated. It was precisely because of this that Jianghai dared to put it back in the sea. "Then let's do it." Hearing Jianghai's words, the others didn't say much. They happened to have a snowplow. As long as they could get this thing out of the water, it wouldn't be too troublesome to send it back to the sea. Originally, Philemon and the others planned to drain the water first, and then lift it up. After all, this was a shark that ate people. But with Jianghai here, they obviously didn't need to do that. Jianghai put his hand into the swimming pool, and the sand tiger shark swam over. After it was easily turned over by Jianghai, Bell and $1 used a large net cushion to pick up the big shark. Then the four of them exerted their strength. This shark was now about 260 or 70 kilograms, which was really not light. But the four men were still able to lift it, not to mention Jianghai, who was the limit of human strength. The four of them used their strength to lift the shark onto the snowplow, and then quickly ran to the beach. If it was an ordinary shark, it would have been half dead even if it didn't die. But the vitality of this shark was obviously much stronger than that of ordinary sharks. Jianghai and the others came to the dock. When the shark was sent into the sea, it only took a few seconds for it to adapt to the sea. After swimming in the sea, it returned to Jianghai, who was still squatting there. "Help me look after this place in the future. I'll give you a name. You're not small, and your name is Silly and Tiger. You'll be called Big Silly from now on." Looking at the sand tiger shark emerging from the water, Jianghai chuckled and named his fourth pet. Today's second update was delivered continuously. Chapter 77. Jianghai really didn't have any talent for naming things. This was something he himself admitted. He called the almost pure black Caucasus Xiao Bai, and the green-gray-green wolf mastiff Xiao Huang. There was clearly no yellow or white fur, but Jianghai was so tenacious that he succeeded in naming them. When it came to the Xiaoma and the sand tiger shark, he was obviously more casual in naming them. He called the big Xiaoma Xiao Xia, and the scary shark De Sha. Fortunately, $1 and the others didn't understand Huaxia language. Otherwise, they would be speechless. After sending the shark back to the ocean and giving it an order to help guard his fishing ground, Jianghai, Philip, and the others went back. On the way back, Jianghai was still thinking. In the past, when he read farming novels, the protagonists in those novels would collect a lot of pets. There were dogs, wolves, and eagles. This was one of the highlights of farming novels. Now it seemed that he had collected a lot of pets. At present, the number was still a little low, but having 4 was a good start. While he was affirming himself in his heart, the car arrived at the warehouse. Because of the shark just now, the car had arrived at the warehouse. Because of the shark, the sky was completely dark at this time. It seemed that he could only postpone the idea of buying a coat until tomorrow. That night, Jianghai went to Philip's house to have a meal before returning to his own home. To be honest, after a day of work, he was quite tired. After taking a shower, he lay on the bed and played with his mobile phone for a while before going to sleep. Jianghai's life was really a bit of an otaku and a bit of a loner. He didn't have many friends. It was like this in China. Except for a few of his best friends, he had almost no contact with other high school classmates and college classmates. Especially after he got married. He didn't know if it was because of his inferiority complex or something else, But he didn't keep in touch with these few friends of his. Other people had friends everywhere, colleagues and classmates, but Jiang Hai seemed to only have these few good friends. After coming to the United States, he seemed to be even more reluctant to make friends. Other people were poor in the city and nobody cared about them, while rich people had distant relatives in the mountains. Jiang Hai was different. Even if he was rich, he didn't seem to have any distant relatives. Other rich people had endless things to do every day, but he seemed to be very free every day. Just like now, he swiped his mobile phone and went to sleep. Every day was regular. He didn't seem like a young man in his 20s, let alone a young man in his 20s. Even if he was in his 60s or 70s, in this aging world, they would probably be more diligent than him. But Jiang Hai didn't care. He felt that this kind of life was quite good. Besides, it wasn't that he didn't have any friends. There were a few in China and a few abroad. While thinking about driving to buy clothes tomorrow, Jiang Hai fell asleep. This is his information? He really went to Boston? In Boston, the mountains were covered in snow. At this time, the same situation was happening in the imperial capital. However, compared to Boston, the smog here was much heavier. It was so heavy that after going out, the visibility was almost only a few meters. This was also one of the most troubling problems in China in recent years. In winter in the north, heating was needed. Heating was needed to provide enough warmth and heat to the people. But at the same time, the air pollution was extremely serious. Some people said that it was related to the increase in cars. Yes, it was related. But in summer, there were just as many cars, but there was less smog. Winter was the most important. In the northern regions, most people were still using thermal power to generate heat. Coal was what they burned. This kind of thing naturally polluted the air very seriously. However, at this time, Qili's office was still pretty good. This was because there were 2 air purifiers in her office. In addition to her office, there were also a lot of air purifiers in the other offices. This made the air in the office much better than outside. After the last fight, Qili sent people to investigate Jiang Hai's situation. It turned out that it was really as Jiang Hai and Fu Yuan said. Jiang Hai did indeed sell a diamond, and had hundreds of millions of dollars. Although Jiang Hai was also a rich man, after all, in China, connections were much more important than money. As long as Qili wanted to investigate, she could still find out. Then, Jiang Hai really went to Boston and bought a manor. He lived in the manor all day long, and lived so comfortably that Qili's eyes were a little red. Boss, what should we do next? Looking at Qili's appearance, the bespectacled female secretary next to her couldn't help but whisper. In fact, she was a little uncomfortable. After all, she used to look down on Jiang Hai the most. Now Jiang Hai suddenly got lucky, and became rich all of a sudden. In terms of pure wealth, he was even richer than Qili's family. This made her feel quite unbalanced. Why did this guy get lucky? Envy, jealousy, and hatred were the most obvious portrayals of this woman at this time. If possible, she wanted to kidnap Jiang Hai. What should we do? Let's leave it at that for now. He has such a good place to go, so I don't have to worry. Go and get the acquisition proposal of Yunyuan Company. Glancing at the assistant, Qili said angrily. Although she was very unwilling in her heart, what could she do? Jiang Hai had already made it clear that he was no longer interested in her. He didn't want to act with her anymore. Divorce was the only way out for the two of them now. But whether it was because of pride or possessiveness, after getting the document, Qili didn't sign it. Yes. Hearing Qili's words, the assistant nodded and turned to leave the office. She could also see that Qili was in a bad mood. But no matter how bad her mood was, there was nothing she could do. Jiang Hai's wings had hardened, and he could fly. She couldn't control him anymore. No matter what Qili thought. When Qili went back to rest after a busy day, it was already the next morning for Jiang Hai. It snowed the day before yesterday, but it didn't snow yesterday. However, the violent sea breeze still piled up the snow and scattered it everywhere. Fortunately, it was only a thin layer of snow with some frost outside. For Jiang Hai, it wasn't a big deal. In the morning, he got up and let the 2 dogs play in the snow while he took a broom and swept the snow. After a simple run, he went to Mrs. Philemon's house to have breakfast. After that, he didn't go back. Instead, he drove straight to town. He didn't forget that he had to buy leather clothes today. His driver's license had been upgraded before the snow. In fact, it was just a road test. Although Jiang Hai had never touched a car before, he still understood simple things like a Peugeot. After all, his driver's license was really obtained through the test. Now that he had a driver's license, at least Jiang Hai didn't have any problems driving himself. His F650 was finally no longer a decoration. After getting into the car, Jiang Hai started the engine and drove toward the town of Winthrop in the distance. The population of the United States wasn't small. There were more than 300 million people. However, the problem was that the territory was almost the same size as Huaxia. Compared to the population of 1.3 billion, there was a huge difference. This was mainly reflected in the number of staff. For example, in China, the snow on the main road outside the town would have been cleared in a day or two. However, in the United States, there was really no one to clear it. Of course, the ground here was also simply cleaned up, but there was still a lot of snow. Jiang Hai got on the highway and drove very slowly. The original half-hour drive took Jiang Hai more than an hour to reach Winthrop. Fortunately, he was covered in snow along the way. It looked beautiful and not boring. As the car drove into the town, a different feeling greeted him. The snow on the main road of the town had been cleared. Many children were playing in the snow, building snowmen, or having snowball fights on the lawn near the main road, and in the periphery of the various houses. This made Jiang Hai feel a different atmosphere. Looking at the scene outside through the car window, Jiang Hai couldn't help but chuckle and mutter softly, "I really miss my childhood." Not long after, Jiang Hai's car arrived at the small town. It was the outdoor goods store that Belle had told him about. After parking the car, Jiang Hai jumped out of the car and walked into the store. As soon as he walked in, Jiang Hai's eyes couldn't help but light up. This outdoor goods store really sold outdoor goods. Almost everything that could be used outdoors was sold here. Thick clothes, jackets, tents, pants, shoes, helmets, binoculars, fishing rods, rubber boats, etc. It even included guns. Yes, inside the outdoor goods store in the United States, everything is sold. From small things like food, biscuits, to big things like clothes, tents, assault boats, and even all kinds of weapons, guns, bows, crossbows, cold weapons. Everything is available. As soon as he walked in, Jiang Hai couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He didn't understand what was going on, but he felt a sense of awe-inspiring. "Hello, what can I do for you?" At this time, a young man in his 20s, wearing a coat of this store, walked out of the inner room and asked Jiang Hai with a smile, "I want to buy some clothes." Hearing this person's words, Jiang Hai immediately said to him, "Oh, is that so? We have a lot of outdoor clothes here, and many of them are exclusive to the United States military. For example, these heavy winter clothes are used by the United States soldiers. They are made of nylon with polyester fillers inside." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the shop assistant here also introduced these clothes to Jiang Hai. This kind of clothes was the cheapest among the coats sold here, but it was very affordable. It was thick, warm, and cheap. Looking at what Jiang Hai was wearing, he thought that Jiang Hai would choose this kind of clothes. Today's update was delivered to everyone, 2 consecutive updates. Chapter 78. Indeed, before coming here, Jiang Hai did consider choosing this kind of clothes because it was really warm. Yesterday, when he saw Bale wearing this kind of clothes, he was really envious. But after coming here, he found that this kind of clothes was actually the cheapest kind. Jiang Hai didn't want to buy it, although he didn't like to compare. But no matter what, he was still a rich man. If the clothes sold here were all like this, then he would have bought them. But he clearly saw better ones, which made him unwilling to buy them again. "I want something better." Waving his hand, Jiang Hai interrupted the young man's words and continued to say to him, "Something better? Then look here." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the young man was stunned for a moment. Then the smile on his face became wider. He brought Jiang Hai to a counter next to him and began to introduce the clothes here. There were a total of 3 types of clothes that could protect against the cold. The aforementioned polyester and cotton were of the same level. The better ones were down jackets. Each type of down jacket was different, so the price was also different. In fact, People who didn't know much about down jackets would think that it was just the feathers of ducks and geese. In fact, there were many types of jackets. Generally speaking, goose down was better than duck down, and the goose down that could be bought on the market was basically goose feathers. That is, the feathers of the goose were cut off from both sides, and the stem in the middle was removed. The resulting fine feathers were the inside of the down jackets sold outside. But this kind of down was actually not very good. The real good down was the layer of fine feathers close to the goose's body. In the past, when Jiang Hai was in China, he heard Su Wei say that Su Wei had a relative in the countryside who specialized in raising geese. This kind of feathers, in late autumn, there would be foreign merchants who would go to the village to collect them. It was sold in taels. One tael of this kind of goose down would be worth 200 or 300 yuan. It was not expensive. One must know that this kind of down jacket, 10 geese might not even be able to collect 3 taels. And this kind of down jacket only cost a few taels, and it would be very warm. And this kind of down jacket, if it was sold outside, it would sell for 6,000 or 7,000 yuan. The good ones could even be sold for tens of thousands or tens of thousands, which was comparable to mink fur. Of course, the people in the United States didn't care about that. The down jackets here were the kind with the fur removed. They weren't cheap either. A prettier down jacket sold for about $300, which was equivalent to 2,000 yuan. Jiang Hai glanced at the down jacket and couldn't help but curl his lips. To be honest, he felt that this price wasn't worth it. Perhaps seeing that Jiang Hai wasn't very satisfied with this, the young man couldn't help but smile. The only thing better than a down jacket is a leather jacket. However, there are both cheap and expensive ones. Looking at Jiang Hai, a person couldn't help but speak. But when Jiang Hai heard his words, his interest was piqued. Where is it? He looked around and found that although this shop wasn't small, there was no place to store the leather jackets. It's at the back. I'll take it out for you. You don't know that the people from the Animal Protection Association are the most annoying. The country allows us to sell it, but these people come to find trouble every 2 or 3 days. We have no choice but to put these things inside. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the young man said helplessly as he walked inside. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai suddenly thought of the dog lovers. Didn't you say that you're not allowed to sell leather jackets now? Jiang Hai asked curiously as he followed the young man. Yes, you're not allowed to sell wolf and bear skins. But other kinds of deer, mink, rabbit, and fox skins are still allowed to be sold. I don't have mink skins here. You can go to the big shopping mall, but the ones sold there are more expensive. Now it's impossible to buy a mink skin jacket without at least $3,000. Seeing that Jiang Hai was interested, the young man explained to Jiang Hai. Although there were 300 million people in the United States, it was still considered vast and sparsely populated. In addition, the protection of wild animals was very strong. So many animals in the United States were a disaster. For example, the most famous deer was not only a disaster in Canada, but it was also allowed to be hunted. It was the same in the United States, because people in Europe and America almost never ate wild animals. It was not like in China, where wild animals were rare treasures. But in Europe and America, people here felt that the meat of wild animals was too dry. It was too thin and did not taste good. At the same time, there was no way to get rid of the smell of wild animals. It was completely inferior to domesticated animals. Most importantly, these wild animals were likely to have parasites. If they could not be killed and people ate them, it would be troublesome. It could be fatal. So in the United States, more than 98% of people did not eat wild animals. Other than some wilderness enthusiasts who sometimes beat wild animals for a sumptuous meal, they rarely ate wild animals. They would rather kill wild rabbits and wild deer than eat them. But the meat and organs were not eaten. But the skin could be peeled and made into leather jackets. But these things could not be sold openly, because the people from the Animal Protection Association would scold the government. It was precisely because of this association's tyrannical character that other than some overseas luxury shops that would sell fur jackets, no shops in the country would sell fur jackets openly. Even if they sold fur jackets, they would sell artificial fur jackets, which were much cheaper than the real thing. If it was not for Jiang Hai's Asian appearance, the shop assistant might not have brought him these jackets. Not long after the shop assistant went into the warehouse, he carried out a large pile of leather jackets. The style of these leather jackets was very simple. It was not like the variety in China. There were not so many patterns and styles. The only thing that surprised Jiang Hai was that these leather jackets were really thick. The leather jackets in China were more or less stretched. The leather jackets that were originally 10 centimeters would be stretched to 20 centimeters, or even 30 centimeters. But the leather jackets here were only 1 centimeter. Jiang Hai casually picked up a jacket and blew on it. This was the way his mother taught him when she was still alive. If the bottom of the jacket was exposed, then it was not a good jacket. It was stretched too far. If the bottom was not exposed, then it was not a good jacket. But after blowing on it, the bottom was not exposed. Jiang Hai looked at it and saw that it was densely covered in fur. It was really thick. The leather jackets in our shop are not fancy. The only advantage is that they are thick and cheap. These are deerskin. Different numbers have different prices. A small size is $400. A large size is $600. I think you should wear medium size. These are fox fur jackets. They are cheaper, $200 each. Rabbit fur jackets are even cheaper, around $100. Listening to the man's introduction, Jiang Hai could not help but curl his lips. $100, $200 each. He would rather buy a down jacket. The only good-looking deerskin jacket was similar to a woolen coat. It was not what Jiang Hai liked. So he kept going back and forth among the leather jackets that the man took out. But after a while his eyes suddenly lit up. In his line of sight, a coat appeared in front of him. This coat was similar to deerskin. It was also yellow, but the fur was longer than deerskin. It gave Jiang Hai a very rough feeling. Seeing this coat, Jiang Hai could not help but pick it up. Seeing Jiang Hai's action, the young man who was still talking opened his mouth in surprise. He did not pay attention to why he took this coat out. What kind of leather is this? Looking at the young man, Jiang Hai asked curiously. Through the touch in his hand, Jiang Hai felt that this piece of leather was much heavier than deerskin. Although there was almost no pattern, it gave off an unusually thick feeling. This is mountain lion skin. To be honest, this is really not allowed to be sold. Seeing Jiang Hai's eyes light up when he heard the word mountain lion, the young shop assistant shrugged helplessly. This mountain lion appeared in Winthrop at the beginning of this year and injured 2 people. After it was shot by the town's police station, the town hall wanted to sell this skin to subsidize the government's allowance. This kind of thing was not uncommon in small towns in the United States. They originally found a buyer, but this matter was reported by a female police officer in the town to the Animal Protection Association. Once the association's people came out to interfere, the town could not sell it. In the end, they could only put it in this store. Unknowingly, it had been a year, and this store naturally did not sell it. Since you want to sell it, then sell it to me. I'm quite interested in this skin. Holding the leather coat, Jiang Hai tried it. Not to mention, it was a little big, but overall it was not bad. The most important thing was that Jiang Hai liked this thing. I can sell it to you. After all, this thing was originally going to be sold. But first of all, this thing is not cheap. Secondly, if you are found by the Animal Protection Association because of this thing, it has nothing to do with us. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the ordinary shop assistant in the United States did not have any intention of loosening the reins only to grasp them better. It was quite troublesome to leave this thing with him. Since Jiang Hai was not short of money and wanted to buy it, then he would sell it to him directly. No problem. I have to ask first. If I wear this thing out, the police won't arrest me, right? He thought for a moment. If he wore a tiger skin or lion skin coat on the streets in China, he would really be invited for coffee. Would it be the same in the United States? Then he would have to consider whether to buy it or not. Don't worry about this. There is a number sewn on the inside of your coat. It is the number allowed by the government to sell it. The police won't care about you. The only thing you need to worry about is the Animal Protection Association. That's all. The young shop assistant shrugged and said. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was relieved. This mountain lion skin coat cost Jiang Hai $2,000, but Jiang Hai was still very happy to buy it. In addition, he bought a deerskin coat, a down jacket, and a set of military polyester fiber clothes, pants and shoes. It was a big pile. How much are you selling this? After confirming the clothes, Jiang Hai pointed at the bow hanging on the wall. Second update, continuously delivered. Please collect more, support more, please everyone. Chapter 79. Who? Bang! As Jiang Hai came out of the outdoor goods store, a huge bag appeared in his hand. He threw the bag into the back of the F-650 next to him. The bag was really big, not much smaller than Jiang Hai's bag. There were a lot of things in it. In addition to the mountain lion fur, there were other clothes and many other things. Jiang Hai saw the complete range of the outdoor goods store in the United States this time. There were hernia-related items, a full set of new fishing rods, not only hand rods but also sea rods. There was also a diving suit and a simple scuba. In addition, there were 200 arrows, a foldable bow, and 2 cold steel knives in his big bag. In the United States, the management of guns was not particularly strict, but the management of knives and bows was extremely strict. Buying such a knife and bow was absolutely not allowed to appear on the streets. Otherwise, the police would find trouble with you. Therefore, Jiang Hai deliberately piled up everything. When he was in the store just now, he took a fancy to a bow at first glance. This bow was made of silver-white metal and looked very beautiful. It was a recurve bow, not a compound bow that was very popular now. Compound bows were very popular now because they could be adjusted and were very light, very popular among bow enthusiasts. However, Jiang Hai preferred this recurve bow. The recurve bow was similar to an ordinary longbow. Its shape was simple, but it looked very beautiful. Most importantly, the recurve bow was very light, easy to use and very easy to maintain. Therefore, Jiang Hai chose it in the end. When he tried it, Jiang Hai's strength played a huge role at this time. According to legend, in ancient times, Huang Zhong could draw a 2-stone bow. Converted to the current strength, a stone in the Han Dynasty was about 60 kilograms. 2 stones was almost 120 kilograms bow. Jiang Hai tried it. He could draw 120 kilograms bow, but it was somewhat difficult. After all, it was the limit of human strength. It was not easy for a human's arm to draw such a heavy bow frequently. However, Jiang Hai still adjusted it to 120 kilograms. This was because if he leveled up in the future, this strength would be enough. However, in the eyes of the shop assistant, he was already so surprised that he did not know what to say. One must know that an ordinary person who played with a bow and arrow would only draw about 60 pounds. Converted to kilograms, it was about 26 or 27 kilograms. How much did Jiang Hai draw now? 120 kilograms. He did not know how much the world record was. Right now he really wanted to curse, but he did not dare. First of all, the customer was God. Second of all, this God's strength was a little too terrifying. At first, he thought that Jiang Hai was just a rich yellow man. Now, it seemed that this guy was not an ordinary person. In the end, this pile of things cost Jiang Hai $20,000. Just the bow alone cost him $7,000. Although this bow did not look as complicated as a composite bow, it was still made of high-quality carbon fiber. There was absolutely no problem with its material. As for the 2 daggers, they were also made of cold steel and abnormally hard. It was just that they had not been sharpened yet. Even so, the head of the daggers could easily pierce through a 1 centimeter thick wooden board. As long as they were sharpened, they would definitely be a great killing weapon. Don't look at how Jiang Hai is buying bows and knives. In fact, he doesn't have any place to use these things. Just like his gun, it was just a decoration. But as a man, how many men didn't like these things? Who knows? I might need them in the future. Looking at these things, this was the only sentence in Jiang Hai's mind. After putting everything away, Jiang Hai directly put on a deerskin coat. Although the style of the coat was a little old-fashioned, it was still very warm. After buying this large bag of things, Jiang Hai wanted to go back. But after thinking about it, he decided to go shopping in the supermarket, since he was already in town. After the snow, The food in the manor was not enough. Of course, there was always enough fish and beef. But in addition to fish and beef, people also needed a lot of things. And these things had to be supplemented by vegetables and fruits. At present, Jiang Hai knew that the most vegetables in the manor were potatoes and kale, and the rest were lacking. As for fruits, it seemed that there were only oranges, and there was basically nothing else. Now that he had come to town, if he did not buy around, Jiang Hai would feel sorry for himself. After getting in the car, he drove to a supermarket in town. This supermarket was also the largest supermarket in town. It could not be said that there was everything, but it was basically the same. More than 90% of the things could be found here. After parking the car, Jiang Hai walked into the supermarket. But just when he walked in, he found that the atmosphere in the supermarket was not quite right. There were lanterns everywhere, and the people in the supermarket were obviously more than usual. There were balloons everywhere, and some people were wearing turkey and corn clothes running around. Looking at the scene in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. What's going on? It's not Christmas yet, what is this? Pushing a small cart and looking at the scene in front of him, Jiang Hai muttered in a low voice. Probably hearing his words, an old man who was also pushing a small cart beside him came over. Young man, you just came to the United States. Looking at Jiang Hai, the old man said with a smile, I've been here for a few months. Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment and replied politely, Then don't you know that Thanksgiving is coming soon? Hearing Jiang Hai's answer, the old man said unexpectedly, Thanksgiving. Hearing these three words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then he remembered that there seemed to be such a program in the United States. But in fact, Thanksgiving was not just a program in the United States. It was the second largest festival in the United States, second only to Christmas. And it was also a festival unique to the United States. This festival can be said to be one of the most hypocritical festivals in the world. There were two versions of this festival. One was the white people's beautified version. It said that the freedom fighters who were unwilling to be persecuted by the Vatican, the so-called Puritans, crossed the ocean and came to the United States on the Mayflower. The location was Plymouth, Massachusetts. Because they had no food at that time and were about to starve to death, the local Indians helped them and taught them how to plant corn, hunt, fish, and other skills. When celebrating the harvest, these Puritans invited the Indians to thank God together. So there was such a Thanksgiving Day. But anyone who knows a little history knows that this beautified version is too ridiculous. Compared with the white people's beautified version, it seems that the Indians' version is more reliable. According to the Native Americans, the Mayflower didn't bring any Puritans, but some exiled criminals. They brought plagues and massacres. It wasn't until 1637 that the Native Americans were almost wiped out. That was the year when the white officials first announced the celebration of Thanksgiving Day. It wasn't to thank the Native Americans, but to celebrate their massacre. Therefore, this was the most hypocritical festival. From this, it also showed that the discrimination in the United States was still very strong. This kind of festival was established to celebrate the slaughter of other races, but it was actually the second largest festival in the United States. This was evident. But in any case, this is the second largest festival in the United States. Even on this day, schools in the United States will be closed. Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai also made an O sound. Although he was a little disdainful of this festival, after all, this was the first festival he celebrated after coming here. In fact, he also celebrated a festival before this, but he didn't know it. Halloween was a children's festival because he lived too far away. Whether it was the children in town or the children in the city, it was impossible for them to run to his house and shout, "Don't give me candy, I'll make trouble," or something like that. So Jiang Hai spent Halloween in a daze. If it weren't for the fact that he came to buy things today, he might not have known that it was Thanksgiving Day. To be honest, with so many Western cultural invasions, Jiang Hai only knew 3 Western programs: Christmas, New Year, and February 14th's dog abuse. Oh no, Valentine's Day. Well, now Jiang Hai was the one being abused. Other than these 3 festivals, he almost didn't know about the others. He tried hard to think about it, only Father's Day, Mother's Day, Arbor Day, Labor Day, and so on. But in fact, there are many festivals in the United States. There are also many important festivals, such as Easter, Flag Day, Independence Day, Columbo Day, Lincoln Memorial Day, President's Day, and so on. This old man may really have nothing to do. After telling Jiang Hai about Thanksgiving Day, he didn't leave. He continued to tell Jiang Hai about the festivals in the United States. After talking about the festivals, he began to talk about the customs here. For example, when you meet, you don't have to shake hands. But when you shake hands, you must look at the other party and bow slightly. If you want to go to someone's house, you must call first. Don't give unfamiliar people your business card. Americans are not willing to treat people to a meal in a restaurant. They prefer to eat at home. They don't like to eat steamed or braised dishes. They don't like to eat overheated dishes. They don't like to eat salty things. They only like to eat sweet and sour things that are less salty. When you go to someone's house for a meal, you can't leave any food on your plate. This is because it is impolite. There are only a few Huaxia dishes that they like. They only like the improved Sichuan cuisine. They like Jiangsu cuisine and Cantonese cuisine more. They like white because it represents purity. They like yellow because it represents harmony. They like blue and red because it represents good luck. They like white cats because they believe that white cats can bring luck. If you give it to a woman who is not your relative, you must not give perfume, clothes, or cosmetics. They should not call black people Negro, because this is what the Spanish called black slaves. They can be called black, so that black people will accept it. However, after black, you must not add people. The correct name should be the African Americans. Do not mention the 13th, or Friday so easily. Do not ask about other people's income. Do not ask if they are married, or anything about their privacy. Do not use black as a taboo. They especially hate giving things to other people. However, if there is a logo related to you on it, it will be suspected of being an advertisement. Today's update. I feel that my favorites are increasing very slowly. Everyone please bookmark me. Qidian Chinese website www.qidian.com welcomes readers to read the latest, fastest, and hottest series on Qidian originals. Chapter 80. Who said that people in the United States were stupid, big, black, and heartless? Listening to the old man's words, the corner of Jiang Hai's mouth kept twitching. Well, in fact, Huaxia had a lot of people, especially in some big families. There were so many things that could drive people like Jiang Hai crazy. However, that was a domestic matter, so it was understandable. When he went abroad, it was difficult to integrate. But fortunately, Jiang Hai didn't come here to work. He came here to be the boss, which was much better. Thank you, sir. I still don't know your name. Hearing that the old man was finally almost done talking, Jiang Hai came to the supermarket. In the past, when he didn't have money, he bought goods. Now that he had money, he naturally bought more. His cart was almost full at this time. Just like what the old man said, it was almost Thanksgiving Day. He specially bought a whole turkey that had been cleaned up, a few turkey legs, a few turkey breasts, some corn, and pumpkins. Of course, the most important thing was vegetables. This was the main purpose of Jiang Hai coming here. In addition to collecting grass and hunting rabbits, he got a lot of wine. Originally, Jiang Hai wasn't very good with wine. In China, he drank 5 to 6 bottles of beer, and then it was over. But after coming to the United States, he didn't know if it was, because he often had meals together and drank a little. Now he liked to drink a little, especially in the afternoon, when he was leaning on the recliner, basking in the sun, reading novels, playing games, or watching TV, drinking a glass of cold beer, with some sauce beef, peanuts, and other snacks. The feeling was really good. Almost 70% of the beer that he got from Old Tony went into Jiang Hai's stomach. This time, he came to the supermarket to buy some wine. When he left, he would go to Old Tony to get a few barrels. Old Tony's brewed beer was much better than the ones he bought. And the beer he bought now was more for those outsiders. After all, who didn't have guests in their house? In addition to beer, there was a lot of foreign wine, whiskey, brandy, gin, rum, and so on. Jiang Hai bought some of them. These can be drunk by his cowboys and fishermen, especially now that it's winter, although they don't have to graze. But every day at the dock in the cowshed, it's also very cold. Drinking some spirits is good for their bodies. At least it will be very warm. As for the problem of getting drunk, Jiang Hai didn't think about it. At least these guys won't be so easy to drink too much. Oh, my name is Wallace Kirk, Green Forest's boss. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the old man said with a chuckle, Uncle Kirk, you know me? Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. Winthrop is not that big. There are not many yellow people here. And yellow people who don't look at the price when buying things are even rarer. At this age, wearing ordinary clothes, buying things without looking at the price, seems to be the only yellow person. Hearing old Kirk's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile awkwardly. It seems to be the case. Well, our conversation is coming to an end. Young man, if you have time in the future, you are welcome to come to my house to play. Seeing Jiang Hai's expression, old Kirk smiled, then patted Jiang Hai's shoulder and pushed his cart away. Seeing the old man's back leaving, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curl his lips. Go to his house to play. Jiang Hai doesn't know him. What a joke. Hey, are you familiar with Mayor Wallace? Just as Jiang Hai was about to buy some sauce, a black guy next to him looked at Jiang Hai curiously and asked. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's footsteps couldn't help but stop. Originally, he was wondering why the old man paid so much attention to him. It turns out that this guy is the mayor here. A bit interesting. Muttering in a low voice, Jiang Hai pushed the cart to the side selling sauce. After buying some Messiah chili sauce, Jiang Hai went to pay the bill. Because he bought a lot of things, the supermarket specially asked the security guard to help Jiang Hai move these things into the car. After giving the security guard a tip of $10, Jiang Hai drove to Old Tony's place. After pulling 2 large barrels of beer, Jiang Hai returned to his manor. Before coming back, he had already called Robbins and asked them to come over and help move things. When his car was parked, Robbins, Philip, and Belle had been waiting for a long time. Haha, boss, you really bought a lot of things. Looking at the things in Jiang Hai's car, Robbins shook his head. He knew that Jiang Hai's trip to the town would inevitably be like this. He couldn't help but laugh, jumped into the car and began to move. Hey boss, your clothes are heavy. How many did you buy? Seeing Luo Binsi get in the car, Jiang Hai also parked the car and got in the car. He first picked up his clothes and handed them down. The person who received the clothes was Belle, but as soon as he took it, he felt that his hand was heavy. He immediately used all his strength to lift the big bag. He clenched his teeth and carried it into the villa. After he finally threw the things on the carpet of the villa, he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief and asked with some curiosity. The clothes are actually not that heavy, but there are 2 knives, a bow, and 100 arrows inside. I think this is quite heavy. Hearing Belle's words, Jiang Hai lifted a huge beer barrel in one hand and said to him while moving it inside. There are knives and bows. Boss, let me see it later. After all, Belle is a soldier. When he heard Jiang Hai's words, his eyes couldn't help but light up. Then he smiled and said to Jiang Hai. After Jiang Hai heard it, naturally, he didn't refuse. Hey boss, you also bought a turkey? At this moment Philemon, who was moving things inside, couldn't help but see the big turkey that Jiang Hai bought. He looked at Jiang Hai with a surprised face and asked, It's almost Thanksgiving. Why didn't you tell me? I went to the supermarket in town and saw that they were having an event, so I bought it. You can take this turkey back later. I don't know how to cook it, so I'll go to your house to eat. Hearing Philemon's words, Jiang Hai immediately said, Turkey is actually not delicious. It's more for the sake of freshness and the festive atmosphere. But after hearing Jiang Hai's words, Philemon and Robbins couldn't help but smile bitterly and shook their heads. Philemon looked at Jiang Hai and said, This won't do, boss. My oven can't hold such a big turkey. I can only put it in your place. Hearing Philemon's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. Then he patted his head. At first, he only thought about the problem of buying a big turkey, but he forgot that the oven also has a size. It seems that in this residential area, only his oven can hold such a big turkey. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai waved his hand, and announced that they will come to his place for Thanksgiving. Haha, boss, we will come even if you don't say it. We have to eat together for Thanksgiving. Hearing this, Belle also laughed. Oh, it's all thanks to me buying this turkey. Otherwise, if I buy it now, what if I can't buy it? Hearing what Belle said, Jiang Hai smiled proudly. It seems that the turkey he bought is quite right. Boss, you really don't have to worry about the turkey. Even if we don't buy it, we can still catch it. There are a lot of these things in our forest. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robins also said at this time, we have turkeys here. Hearing what Robin said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at him. There are a lot of them. In addition to turkeys, there are also a lot of seabirds. These seabirds don't fly, and will nest in our forest in winter. I remember when you went out to sea, didn't you see a lot of puffins? They live in that forest. Seeing Jiang Hai's slightly different look, Philemon also said, oh, I remember. Hearing Philemon's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but slap his forehead. He also remembered that when he went out to sea that day, he saw a lot of puffins. In addition to puffins, there were also seagulls. Philemon said that these seabirds live in his forest. He listened carefully at first, but then forgot. But can we catch the birds in the forest? Now that he remembered, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be interested. He looked at the people in front of him curiously, and asked with a look of surprise on his face. Of course you can. Except for some protected birds. You have the right to dispose of all the animals in this manner, including those birds and the eggs of those birds. In that forest, there are at least dozens of turkeys. Every year before and after Thanksgiving, I will kill a batch to maintain the number of the woodland population. Seeing Jiang Hai's curious expression, Robins also said to him, but he didn't say anything. He would sell the killed turkeys to subsidize the family. But even if Jiang Hai thought of this, he didn't point it out. After all, he only took over this manor for a few months. In a sense, the turkeys killed by Robins didn't belong to his property at that time. Then let's go take a look later? Hearing what Robins said, Jiang Hai also felt a little itchy in his heart. He couldn't help but raise his head and look at the people in front of him eagerly. Okay, let's go take a look when we're done. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robins glanced at the weather outside. Today's weather was still very good. Although the weather outside was a little cold, the wind was not strong. The sun was warm, and it was really a good time to hunt. Since Jiang Hai was interested in these things, they must go. Today's second update, continuously delivered. Chapter 81. In fact, the most suitable time for hunting was autumn, when the air was cool and the animals were accumulating energy for the winter. At this time, the animals were the most delicious and the fattest. However, apart from autumn, winter was also a good season for hunting. First, because the trees in a large area are withered, it is very suitable to observe the situation of the birds on the top of the trees. Second, the snow is soft and animals can't move quickly here, and they will leave enough traces that are easy to track. Third, many creatures have hibernated in winter, such as snakes, bears, and a large area of poisonous insects and ants have been frozen to death. These creatures, which are a great threat to humans, have disappeared. So many people like to hunt in winter. Jiang Hai didn't understand this before. He was a commoner in the country where wild boars are second-level protected animals. How could a commoner like him have ever hunted before? He hasn't even hunted a rabbit. Now that he suddenly said that he was going to hunt, it was impossible to say that he was not excited. What do we need to prepare? Hearing Luo Binxi's words, Jiang Hai immediately asked him anxiously. Actually, we don't need to prepare anything. After all, we're just playing in the woods of our manor. But if we're going to the mountains, we'll need to prepare more. Now we just need to wear thicker clothes, carry weapons, and get a bag to store our prey. Seeing Jiang Hai's excited expression, Luo Binxi hesitated and decided to tell him the truth. Hearing that he didn't need to be armed so much, Jiang Hai was a little lost. But soon, he was pushed back by the spirit of going hunting. Then I will take a gun, and I will take this bow too, and this belt. Hearing Luo Binxi's words, Jiang Hai began to think about what he needed to bring. Hearing his words, Luo Binxi and others began to sweat on their foreheads. They really wanted to tell Jiang Hai that he didn't need to bring so many things, because there were not many things in Jianghai's woods. After all, it was just an artificial forest, not a deep mountain forest. Although the woodland was not small, there were not many things in the woodland. Most of them were seabirds. After all, it was close to the sea. In addition to seabirds, there were only 7 or 8 kinds of terrestrial animals, according to Luo Binxi's observations over the years. Squirrels, hares, turkeys, pheasants, otters, possums, foxes, and maybe a few raccoons. That's all. There were no other creatures. Not to mention wolves, bears, mountain lions, and American leopards. Even lynx were not here. After all, although this woodland was a certain distance from the cowshed and the residential area, if there were large carnivores, it would be a threat to the people living here. Especially in the past few years, there was only Luo Binxi here. So Jianghai really didn't need to bring so many things. He really didn't want to go hunting in the mountains. But they couldn't say anything now. They couldn't keep pouring cold water on the boss. So these people consciously shut up. Boss, do you know how to shoot? For a while, the scene was somewhat awkward. At this time, Belle stood up and tried to change the topic. I really don't know. Fortunately, Jianghai didn't care about changing the topic. Plus what Belle said had something to do with him. Then I will teach you. After Belle heard Jianghai's words, he couldn't help but smile and change the topic. Success! Then he walked to Jianghai's side and took out the folded bow from the wooden box. After repositioning it, he smiled and was ready to pull it. But unfortunately, as soon as he pulled it, he found that he had underestimated this bow. It's really hard. Whispering in a low voice, Belle smiled awkwardly and then pulled the bow with all his strength. But unfortunately, even with his full strength, the bow only pulled about 1/3 of the way, and it stopped moving. Impossible, is it really that hard? Seeing Belle's pale face, Robbins couldn't help but be interested. He walked over and took the bow from Belle's hands. He took a deep breath and pulled the bow. Unfortunately, even though he was bigger than Belle, he could only pull 1/3 of the bow before he couldn't pull it anymore. Robin's face was red from anxiety. Let me try. Seeing that Luo Binxi couldn't pull the bow, Philemon also ran over with a smile. Although Philemon is a black man, he has a big mouth and looks very weak. But in fact he is not small. And the most important thing is that he is a black man. The difference between races is enough to scare people, not to mention this guy's size. But even so, he only pulled the bow a little bit, about 2/5 of the way, and he gave up halfway. In the end, the 3 of them turned their heads together and looked at Jianghai. The meaning in their eyes was very clear. What's the use of buying a bow that can't be pulled? Seeing the 3 of them looking at him, Jianghai couldn't help but look at them with disdain, and took the bow from Philemon's hand. Jianghai pulled the bow with both arms, and in an instant, the 3 of them couldn't help but stare. Who the F***ck so strong? My God! Son of a bitch. Cough, I didn't swear. Although they already knew that Jianghai was strong, they didn't think that Jianghai's strength could be so great. It's hard for them to imagine that Jianghai's body, which doesn't look very tall and strong, has such great strength. Seeing the surprised eyes of the 3, Jianghai chuckled, and then released the bow again. The buzzing sound of the bowstring made the 3 of them a little scared. But fortunately Belle, who was a soldier, reacted first. Although Jianghai gave him a slap in the face, since he said that he would teach Jianghai archery, he naturally won't go back on his words. He specially ran back home and took out a human target. There was no other way. He only had a human target in his house, so he erected it in the grass outside. While they were packing up these things, Jianghai could try it first. At the same time, he also told Jianghai the essentials of archery. Archery and shooting were different. Archery only required 3 points in one line. This only required more practice. But archery required some troublesome things, because archery only provided 2 points, and the 3rd point required the archer to feel it himself. At the same time, archery could put the eyes closer to the crosshairs, making it easier to shoot, but archery was not the same. The head was fixed and could not be moved. Moreover, the strength of each pull of the bowstring, and each standing position, in fact had to be paid attention to. Even when releasing the bowstring, there was a need to pay attention to it. Jiang Hai was a beginner in all of this. After roughly understanding, Jiang Hai took the bow and arrow and ran out into the grass outside. After seeing Jiang Hai's movements, Xiao Huang and Xiao Bai immediately ran out to watch Jiang Hai practice archery. Looking at the target in the distance, Jiang Hai picked up a pure metal arrow and put it directly on the bow. With the strength of his arms, the 120-kilogram bow was pulled open by him in an instant. But to be honest, 120-kilogram bow was a bit weak. Before he leveled up, he could only rely on the strength of the python to control the 120-kilogram bow. But to be honest, 120-kilogram bow was a bit weak. He could only maintain balance for about 10 seconds or so, and his hands began to tremble. Damn it! Originally, he didn't have time to aim in the first 10 seconds. Now that his hands began to tremble, it was even more impossible to aim. Cursing silently, Jiang Hai had no choice but to shoot the arrow. But it could be seen that this arrow missed. It flew out about 10 meters away from the target. Moreover, this 120-kilogram force was indeed a little scary. It kept flying. After flying for about a kilometer, it landed in the snow. Seeing the arrow fly there, Xiao Huang, who was beside Jiang Hai, immediately rushed out and quickly ran to the arrow, running back with the arrow in his mouth. Jiang Hai patted Xiao Huang's head as a reward for his cleverness, but his mind was thinking about the arrow just now. He was only 50 meters away from the target, but he flew out 950 meters and missed by 10 meters. He really wasn't an ordinary expert. Damn, there's really a difference between having an arrow and not having one. After shooting the arrow, Jiang Hai couldn't help but shake his hand. 120 kilograms was still a bit too strenuous. But he was a stubborn person. Since he had set 120 kilograms, then 120 kilograms would do. If he really couldn't do it, then he would shoot the arrow in the first 10 seconds. Since he had made up his mind, Jiang Hai didn't say anything else. He took a deep breath and started the second arrow attack. This time, it was a little better. He shot the arrow before his hands started to shake. This time, it was a little better, but it still didn't hit the target. It was about 2 meters away from the target. This time, it flew a kilometer away. Before Xiao Huang could move, Xiao Bai had already run out. After being improved by the dragon's blood, Xiao Bai's intelligence was actually very high. At least it knew how to learn. When Xiao Bai picked up the arrow, Jiang Hai started shooting again. He had to admit that Jiang Hai's body was really good. Its learning ability and adaptability were very good. The third arrow hit the target, but unfortunately, it still flew nearly 500 meters away. Because the target was shot through, this shot could be considered to have hit the edge of the target. Although it still didn't hit the target, it was more or less an improvement. It also gave Jiang Hai a lot of encouragement. After that, he continued to practice. 10 seconds of aiming was really a short time, especially for a beginner like Jiang Hai. As long as it took more than 10 seconds, he would definitely miss. Within 10 seconds, the hit rate wasn't very good. Out of 10 arrows, about 3 would hit the target. In total, about 7 would hit the target, and 3 would still miss. Jiang Hai didn't have a good way to deal with this. Now he could either wait to level up or lower the strength of the bow. However, if Jiang Hai wasn't willing to adjust, then he could only wait to level up. Fortunately, after he finished improving the grassland, the scales in his body had increased in all aspects. 8 scales a day, and it was almost 300 scales. He was less than 3 months away from reaching 1,080 scales. Today's first update. Xiao Fei has been publishing his novel for a month and a half, but this result, until now, the 4,300 bookmarks. Why does it feel like it's getting more and more empty? Dear big bosses, if you feel that Xiao Fei's writing is still passable, then please click on the bookmark. Thank you everyone. Chapter 82. Let's go. After having a good lunch at Philip's house, Jiang Hai waved his hand. Robbins and Belle, who had nothing to do today, followed him and drove Robin's modified snowmobile towards the distant forest. Because it was snowing, the snow on the entire pasture was more than 10 centimeters thick. Even if the cows were released to graze, they would need to consume more energy to do so. Of course, Jiang Hai's pasture wasn't like this, but Robbins and the others didn't know that. Jiang Hai also didn't intend to point it out. It was a good choice to let the cows fatten up in the cowshed. Because the cows stayed in the cowshed, there were fewer cowboys. What they needed to do every day was to keep the cowshed ventilated, clean up the cow dung, feed the cows, add water, and occasionally brush their hair. That was all. The 5 cowboys were originally very busy every day, but after winter, they had some time to take a break. Of course, the so-called break was not real rest. It meant that they could do some work that had nothing to do with the cowshed, such as patrolling the surroundings of the manor to see if the fence was broken, repairing the machinery, or maintaining the house. It was just that they did not have to deal with the cows for the time being. This was considered a break. Compared to the cowboys, Edward Anderson, who was only a sailor, was much more miserable. Every day, he had to go out to sea. The biting cold sea breeze on his face was not much worse than a blade. Jiang Hai's body couldn't bear it. Robbins and Belle, who were resting today, patrolled around the manor in the morning. A manor like this needed to be patrolled every day, especially in winter. After winter, the beasts in the mountains would come down due to the lack of food. If they broke the fence and entered the manor to hunt the cows and sheep, it would be a big problem for the manor owner. Of course, there was another problem, which was to guard against people. Therefore, they had to patrol the area every day. As for the maintenance of the house and machinery, they didn't have to worry too much. The reason for that was because those houses were all extremely sturdy when they were built. Wuquan did not have the intention to cut corners. Every villa was built with reinforced concrete, and the roof was the same, except for the need to shovel away the snow every spring to prevent water from seeping in. There was no problem with the houses here. Most of the machinery was bought by Jiang Hai this year, so naturally, there wouldn't be any problems. Therefore, these people only had half a day to work during the rest of the day. They could still do their own things in the afternoon. However, they had to accompany their boss to go hunting this afternoon. Whoosh whoosh. Following the sound of the engine, the 3 snowmobiles sped towards the forest in the distance. Long before the arrival of winter, Robbins had unloaded 3 of the 4-wheeled motorcycles that Jiang Hai had bought. Actually, it was only a few parts and 4 tires that were removed. A cowboy like this was actually a little expert in hands-on work. At least this kind of transformation was easy. The position of the front wheel of the motorcycle was replaced with 2 sledge boards. Because the 4 motorcycles that Jiang Hai bought were very big, 2 sledge boards were needed at the back periphery to make the motorcycle float in the snow. As for the propulsion device, it was a caterpillar. The position of the rear wheel was replaced with 2 caterpillar tracks, but the position was slightly higher than that of the sledge. This snowmobile was considered to be completed. Not only could it run in the snow, but it could also run on land. Of course, it wasn't as fast as the tires, but the problem was that the tires couldn't run in the snow. It wasn't the first time that Jiang Hai rode this thing. Although it wasn't very good, at least it was decent. After riding for a while in the snow, Jiang Hai and the others also parked their motorcycles outside the forest. Then, they changed into snow boots, took their weapons and walked into the forest. Of course, Jiang Hai's 2 followers, Xiao Huang and Xiao Bai, were also very interested after learning that they were going to play in the forest. This forest was planted by the former owner of this manor. The original idea was very simple. Planting some trees could be used to block the sea breeze. If there was a need, these trees could be cut down in the future to build a house or something else. Even if they were to sell it, they would still be able to make a lot of money, right? But unfortunately, before the trees grew, he went bankrupt. In the end, he packed them up and sold them to the auction house. The trees here, after all these years of growth, could now be said to be mature. The trees in the United States were also different from the trees in China. In the north of China, there were basically a few kinds of trees: birch, willow, pine, cypress, and so on. There were also these trees here, but there weren't many. According to Robbins, there were about 5,000 trees in Jiang Hai's forest. 2,000 of them were oak trees. This kind of tree was also called oak tree or oak tree. The tallest tree grew more than 30 meters. This kind of tree also existed in China, but it wasn't too common. Because the branches of this kind of tree were too soft, it wasn't very popular in China. There were only two kinds of trees in China. One was used to build houses, and the other was used to make furniture. This kind of soft tree was used to build houses. The house would collapse if it was used to make furniture. In addition to being moisture-proof and insect-proof, it wasn't very sturdy. Therefore, this kind of tree wasn't very popular in China. But in Europe and the United States, this kind of tree was quite popular. This was because this kind of tree was the best raw material used to store red wine in red wine barrels. The price of oak barrels in the United States and Europe wasn't low. This manor had a grape winery. Naturally, these oak trees were prepared for them. In addition to the oak trees, more than half of the remaining 3,000 trees, nearly 1,800 trees, were maple trees. This kind of tree was Canada's national tree. There were also many trees in the United States. This kind of tree was also a kind of economic tree. It was used to make maple syrup. This kind of thing was sold at a high price in China. In fact, Jiang Hai could have collected maple syrup this year, but he didn't. At that time, his focus was more on raising cattle. For things like maple syrup, he would wait until next year. In addition to these two main trees, there were many other trees here. Some were originally planted, and some were brought over by other seabirds after eating the tree species. Therefore, it looked a bit messy. Most of them were willow, pine, cypress, and birch trees from the north. There were also some cherry trees, black walnut trees, and so on. Anyway, Jiang Hai only heard about them from Luo Binci, so he didn't know anything about them. Following the footsteps of the three, they slowly went deep into the forest. As soon as they walked in, Jiang Hai saw an animal. It was a squirrel. It was standing on the branch of an oak tree, looking curiously at Jiang Hai's group. Squirrels were very curious creatures. It was obvious that it hadn't seen people for a while, so it was very surprised. It was just a squirrel. Robins and Belle didn't care at all. Jiang Hai only glanced at it, and then looked away. However, Xiaobai might have seen this thing for the first time. She squatted under the tree and looked at the squirrel. In the human world, looking at each other was a sign of politeness, but in the natural world, looking at each other was a provocation. Therefore, this squirrel that usually had almost no natural enemies, and was the king of this small forest, was angry. Squeak! With a roar from the branch, it also took out an oak fruit from the tree hole next to it. It used almost all its strength, and threw the oak fruit at Xiaobai, who was staring at it under the tree. Phew! Bang! As the oak fruit flew more than 10 meters and smashed directly on Xiaobai's head. The squirrel was extremely proud. In its opinion, Xiaobai would definitely be scared away by this attack, because almost 90% of the animals in this forest would be scared away by it. It believed that the impact of its attack was extremely strong. Unfortunately, this little guy who had never seen a dog before was going to suffer today. Roar, roar, roar. After being hit by the squirrel's oak fruit, Xiaobai was also angry and immediately roared. Hearing its roar, Jiang Hai and the others who were walking in front were shocked. They turned around and saw that Xiaobai was having a conflict with the squirrel. It left them speechless, but Belle still signaled Jiang Hai with his eyes to control Xiaobai. Otherwise, if it continued to roar, they would have to return empty-handed today. Although Jiang Hai was a rookie, he was not stupid. When it came to hunting, it naturally had to be quiet. Was it really okay to roar so openly? Therefore, he was about to turn back and tell Xiaobai to shut up. But before Jiang Hai could move, the squirrel on the tree saw that Xiaobai was not chased away by the oak fruit. It was also angry, and took another rubber fruit, and threw it at Xiaobai. Although Xiaobai already had the intention to dodge, it still dodged. However, this time, the oak fruit hit its back. Although it did not hurt, Xiaobai was still angry. This little guy actually dared to be so cocky in front of it. It really could not tolerate it. As Xiaobai roared, it directly scurried towards the tree, but it forgot that it did not know how to climb trees. Therefore, its body slammed heavily into the tree. Although it was dazed from the collision, its weight of more than 100 kilograms was perfectly applied to the tree. This collision caused the oak tree, which was not thin, to sway. At that moment, although the squirrels standing in the branches hadn't been shaken down, It had given it a fright. After the fright, it flew into a rage out of humiliation. This big black monster actually didn't dare to resist. This made the squirrel very unhappy, so it prepared to continue going back to get the acorn to teach it a lesson. However, before it could return, the force of the shaking shook off a pile of snow at the top of the tree. Today's second update is continuously delivered. Please help me collect it. Thank you. Chapter 83. Hua. Lai. Bang. At this time, Jiang Hai had just arrived under the tree. He glanced at the stunned Xiaobai and could not help but smack its head in anger and laughter. Does it think it's a cat? It still wants to run up the tree. Is it crazy? It turned out that the Caucasian's IQ was indeed a bit problematic. Even after eating Jiang Hai's blood, it could not help but act like an idiot. Just as Jiang Hai was about to pull Xiaobai to the side, a burst of snow fell from the tree. This made Jiang Hai shrink his neck. When he raised his head and looked at the top of the tree, he happened to see a piece of snow falling from the tree. However, the direction was not toward him, but toward the squirrel that was about to go back to get the acorn. The squirrel did not consider the problem of disaster falling from the sky. When it reacted, it was already scared silly. It only saw a snow mountain. Well, to it was indeed a snow mountain. It crashed directly toward it without giving it any chance to resist. The snow mountain had already hit its head heavily, and then smashed it into the snow pile under the tree. Seeing this scene, Little Yellow immediately rushed over and dug in the snow. He picked up a little fat squirrel that was still covered in snow. However, it was obvious that although the squirrel was still alive, it was also stunned by the fall. Its eyes were wide open, and its little mouth was open. It looked at Jiang Hai and the two big dogs in front of it in surprise. Jiang Hai took the squirrel from Little Yellow's mouth and said angrily, "You're really lucky. If it were not for the thick snow pile on the ground, and the fact that it was wrapped in a lot of snow, this would have been enough to turn the squirrel into a meat patty. It would not be like now where it was just a little stunned from the fall. Oh, this is a snow squirrel. It can be considered our first prey." Seeing the change here, Robbins and Belle also walked over. Robbins could not help but laugh when he saw the fat squirrel in Jiang Hai's hand. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be counted? Anything that is in my hands is mine. Hearing Robin's words, Jiang Hai, who originally did not want to take the squirrel, suddenly nodded. Jiang Hai's thinking was somewhat different from the average person. When ordinary people saw animals, the first thing they thought of was whether the animal was dangerous or not. If it was not dangerous, they would be curious. Some people were sympathetic or overflowing with love. They would even make a fuss about whether the animal was cute or not. When Jiang Hai saw any animal, other than humans, his first thought was whether it was delicious or not. Whether it was dangerous or not was secondary. What was most important was whether it was tasty or not. This was just like the shark that he caught. Robbins and AI Hua considered the danger, while he was thinking about shark fins and shark's meat. Although he did not eat it, it was because he had a relationship with it. It was not easy to kill it. As for this squirrel, Jiang Hai's first thought was whether it could be eaten. He remembered that squirrel meat seemed to be quite delicious. However, after confirming that it could be eaten, Jiang Hai curled his lips. It was too little. A squirrel, including its skin and bones, was only a little more than a catty. It might not even be two catties. This bit of meat was not enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. However, in the principle of not leaving empty-handed, he decided to take this little guy back. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins and Belle both chuckled and turned to walk into the depths of the forest. Jiang Hai put the squirrel in a small bag at his waist. This small bag was empty. Originally, Jiang Hai was going to use it to store some fungus. Westerners and Americans did not eat fungus, but Jiang Hai wanted to eat it. This thing was to clear the lungs. However, if he wanted to buy it here, except for some supermarkets in Huaxia, the general supermarkets did not have it. The most important thing was that the things in Huaxia's supermarkets were expensive. It was at least several times more expensive than the ones sold in China. It was not suitable. So when Jiang Hai heard Robin say that there were fungus here, he was going to bring some back in a small bag. But now he had to store it first. After stuffing the frightened squirrel into the small bag, Jiang Hai continued to take the two dogs to follow Belle and Robins into the forest. But before leaving, he specifically told the two dogs to never bark. Then the three people and two dogs quietly walked into the forest. Not long after, Belle, who was walking in front, waved his hand and motioned everyone to stop. Although Robins had lived here for many years, Belle was better than him when it came to hunting. As Belle waved, everyone stopped. Then Belle pointed in a direction. Looking in the direction of Belle's finger, Jiang Hai and Robins could not help but see in the distance, about 40 meters away in a clearing in the forest. At this time, there was a group of spotted pheasants foraging in the snow. Seeing these spotted pheasants, Luo Binsi couldn't help but curl his lips. He thought it was something special. He had seen this kind of pheasant before. This kind of pheasant didn't grow very big. The biggest one was a pound. After removing the internal organs, feathers, and bones, the meat was considered good. Although the meat was good, the taste wasn't very good. What was there to eat? Thinking of this, he could not help but turn his head, and was about to tell Jiang Hai that they were going to catch a turkey or something. But when he turned back, he found that Jiang Hai's eyes were shining. No, they were burning. Fei Wyvern. Looking at the spotted pheasants in front of him, Jiang Hai lowered his voice and whispered. His trembling voice showed his extremely excited thoughts. He originally came here just to catch some turkeys, or other birds, rabbits, and so on. He would go back and have a good meal. But he never thought that there would be a wyvern in his forest. Root. Where? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, not to mention Robins, even Belle was shocked. There is no huaxia dragon in European and American languages. The word long is also called wolf in English, not dragon. So Jiang Hai did not say dragon in Chinese but dragon root. When they heard this word, Belle and Robins were dumbfounded. How could there be a wyvern in hunting? Cough, that kind of pheasant is called wyvern in our country. There is an old saying in our country. Dragon meat in the sky, donkey meat on the ground. These guys are a rare delicacy. Seeing the surprised look of the two, Jiang Hai smiled awkwardly, then licked his lips and said excitedly, Donkey, people in your country still eat donkey meat? However, when they heard Jiang Hai's words, Robins and Belle frowned. Americans rarely eat strange meat. Basically, they only eat chicken, fish, beef, and mutton. They rarely eat pork. Now that Jiang Hai opened his mouth and asked for donkey meat, they couldn't help but frown. Americans rarely eat meat. Don't talk nonsense. You don't understand the delicacy of donkey meat. Compared to donkey meat, horse meat is actually delicious. Forget it. Looking at your faces, I know you haven't eaten it before. Help me catch this bird. Hearing their words, Jiang Hai subconsciously explained. But when he saw their faces become even more strange when he mentioned horse meat, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roll his eyes at them. He has never seen a foreigner in the city. But now, the most important thing for him is to catch these wyverns. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two didn't say much and walked slowly toward these wyverns from both sides. Little Huang, who was beside Jiang Hai, also gradually lowered his body at this time, blending with the surrounding snow, and slowly sneaked toward those wyverns. As for Xiaobai, although it is similar to Little Fool, it is eager to learn and also sneaked over like Little Huang. As for Jiang Hai, he slowly walked forward, licked his dry lips and stared at these guys. After waiting for about 10 minutes, Belle sent a message that everyone is ready. Under Belle's signal, Little Huang directly jumped out of the snow, followed by Xiaobai. As for Jiang Hai, Belle and the other two, they immediately ran out. These wyverns clearly didn't think that they would be caught, because they have been breeding in this small forest for several generations, and no one has ever caught them. So their reaction was a little slow. It was only when Little Huang, the first to jump out, grabbed a wyvern with his mouth and two claws that these wyverns reacted and fled. But unfortunately, it was too late. Xiaobai jumped out and bit one wyvern. At this time, Belle, Jiang Hai, and Luo Binsi also rushed into the flock of wyverns. Belle grabbed one wyvern with each hand, and Luo Binsi did the same. As for Jiang Hai, he was much more ruthless. He first punched the two wyverns in front of him, knocked them down, and then grabbed the other two. At this time, the rest of the wyverns flew away, and only the wyverns in this open space were still struggling. Good stuff. Looking at the 12 wyverns on the ground, Jiang Hai's eyes were about to turn green. Without saying anything, he directly picked up a rope and tied their feet. Of the 12 wyverns, only the one that Xiao Bai bit was dead, and the others were still alive. This was a good thing for Jiang Hai. "Boss, this thing doesn't have much meat. Is it really delicious?" Seeing Jiang Hai happily tying the wyverns, Luo Binci helped and asked curiously. He had caught this thing before, but the taste was really not good. "This thing is not for eating meat, it's for drinking soup." "Sai, you don't understand. When I go back, I'll make it, and you can try it." After tying up all the birds, Jiang Hai happily tied them to the backpack behind him and excitedly said, "Thank you, Brother Zhao." For drinking soup? Cheddar soup? Speaking of soup, the people here probably only knew about cheddar soup. You'll know when the time comes. It's really a good harvest. Haha. However, at this time, Jiang Hai was not in the mood to despise them. Just the harvest made him feel like he was going to wake up laughing at night. It was really awesome. Today's update will be recommended next week, but it was not forcefully recommended. It will not be available on January 1st. It seems that there is no hope for a full attendance in January. Chapter 84. Hazel grouse, commonly known as flying dragon, is also known as tree pheasant and tree hazel grouse in the northeast of Huaxia. It is currently a Class 1 protected animal in Huaxia. It belongs to the order grouse. There are 3 species in the world. They are hazel grouse, and shawl grouse. In fact, the flying dragon that everyone usually talks about refers to the hazel grouse. This kind of hazel grouse is most widely distributed from the western end of Eurasia to the Navia Peninsula in Stan, Spain, Russia, the northeast of Huaxia, and the North Sea region of Japan. The so-called flying dragon refers to this kind of hazel grouse, and the hazel grouse is a specialty of Huaxia. It is only distributed in several provinces such as Shu, Gansu, and Qinghai. Although it is the same genus, the taste is completely different. In fact, the wyverns that Jiang Hai caught can also be considered as pseudo-wyverns. This is because this bird is not a hazel grouse, but a shawl grouse, also known as shawl grouse. This bird is a specialty of the United States and Canada. However, it is obvious that no one hunts this bird in these 2 places. The taste of this kind of bird, to be honest, is not as good as a real flying dragon, but it is almost the same. At least for a foodie like Jiang Hai, it is naturally delicious. After tying the birds to their backpacks, the group continued to walk into the forest. As they walked into the woods, Jiang Hai and the others found that there are really many animals here. Looking at the footprints in the snow, it is not obvious that there are a lot of pheasants, hares, and even foxes here. Jiang Hai even saw foxes. But this kind of creature that needs to be eliminated in domestic farms doesn't need to be taken care of here. Because Jiang Hai mainly raises cows and fish, the calves are better than foxes when they are born. This is inevitable. So in everyone's opinion, foxes are not a threat to humans. After all, before Jiang Hai came, they did not raise chickens here. Speaking of which, Jiang Hai had been tricked by that old man last time. After buying a few chickens back, things had been pretty good recently. Usually he was too lazy to kill chickens to cook, so he just raised these chickens. The cabin was very sturdy, and the fishing net was also very tight, so these fellas couldn't get out. After a few days of adaptation, Jiang Hai found that these fellas had started to lay eggs. Although he was too lazy to kill chickens to eat, the eggs were pretty good. The most important thing was that Jiang Hai almost raised these chickens in a free-range manner. He didn't feed them anything. Their main food source was grass seeds and the insects in the grass. To be honest, these grass seeds and insects were all related to Jiang Hai's blood, which made these chickens very energetic. They laid more eggs, and they were bigger than ordinary native eggs, but they tasted better. This time, Jiang Hai was a little reluctant to kill these chickens. It was good to keep them to lay eggs. As for the fox, it was still the same sentence. There was no need to consider it. Don't think that the dogs in Jiang Hai's manor were only used as cattle herds. They might not be able to fight against large animals, but they were good at dealing with foxes, weasels, and the like. So when they saw these things, Robins and Belle didn't plan to make a move. These foxes were more useful than killing them, because they would maintain the ecological balance in this forest. If they died, then rabbits, pheasants, and the like would proliferate. Although the birds among the seabirds could also help to solve some problems, these birds could only catch adults. They couldn't dig out the nests, and there was no way to prevent the birth of cubs. This couldn't maintain the ecological balance. After all, the death of cubs was a very important part in nature. Of course, if someone had a child, they had to kill it. Foxes would eat children. As for rabbits and ordinary pheasants, although Jiang Hai was very interested in these things, it was obvious that Robins and Belle weren't interested in these things. As mentioned before, the Americans didn't eat game because they were afraid of parasites in the game. In addition, they didn't eat rabbit dishes. And to be honest, if they didn't know how to cook, rabbit meat wouldn't be easy to get. In Jiang Hai's memory, the best place to eat rabbits was Sichuan Huaxia. The rabbits there were the best. Because the rabbit itself had no taste, it would taste whatever it was cooked with. That's why the spicy and fresh taste made it delicious. Dry pot rabbit and soup rabbit tasted very good, unlike Bingcheng, where the rabbits were basically stewed and smoked. To be honest, the taste was very ordinary. At least, Jiang Hai wasn't willing to eat these things. Now that he saw these rabbits, to be honest, Jiang Hai was also a little envious. But considering that the snow was so cold and Robins and Belle had helped him catch so many wyverns, he was a little embarrassed to ask them to help him catch rabbits. So he could only say goodbye to these guys for the time being. Along the way, Robins and Belle also looked around. Not long after, they found their target, this time turkeys. Jiang Hai also looked over, but when he saw them, Jiang Hai couldn't help but frown. At this time, in the open space in the forest, there was a group of turkeys leisurely walking around. It can be seen that they were the same as the hazel grouse that Jiang Hai caught. These things also came in groups, but these turkeys were really ugly. Their black, fat, and short bodies were like a tank, and their drooping necks made people feel a little disgusted. Turkeys and vultures looked very similar, and they were equally ugly. But in the United States, they liked them very much. It really made people speechless. Jiang Hai had only seen dead turkeys before. This was the first time he saw a living one, but after seeing it once, he didn't want to see it a second time. Robins and Belle didn't know Jiang Hai's thoughts at this time. Since they came, they were going to catch 2 turkeys back. Jiang Hai's turkeys were the biggest. They were going to go to Jiang Hai's house to eat during Thanksgiving. As for the turkeys they caught today, they could kill them in the evening. Although turkeys weren't as delicious as beef, they were still quite delicious for cowboys who weren't picky about food. Thinking of this, the 2 men looked at each other, and then took out their guns from behind. The guns used by the 2 men were shotguns, but they weren't loaded with deer pellets. With one shot, not to mention the turkeys would be crushed. The lead pellets that were shot into the turkeys couldn't be dug out at all. So generally speaking, unless they were dealing with some large prey such as elk or bears, they wouldn't use deer pellets to hunt. Now they were using ordinary small lead pellets. There were only 3 lead pellets in each pellet. This kind of pellet wasn't very powerful, but it was perfect for hunting turkeys. The 2 men aimed at a turkey each. As they adjusted their breathing, the 2 pulled the trigger almost at the same time. Bang bang! 2 turkeys instantly fell into a pool of blood, and the rest of the turkeys fled like ostriches. In addition to them, the sound of gunshots startled more birds nesting in the branches. With a burst of shrill bird calls, the flock of birds flew straight from the branches. Jiang Hai couldn't help but open his mouth wide, but then he thought of something and immediately closed his mouth. If a bird shit at this time, he would open his mouth wide. Well, it would be more reliable to keep his mouth shut. Just as Jiang Hai was looking at this shocking scene, he suddenly saw 2 thieves flying crookedly from a bush in the distance. Needless to say, these 2 guys were doing something just now, but because they took off from the ground, they couldn't control their balance when flying. When they flew near the canopy, they were still a little crooked. One of the wings accidentally scratched one of the big tree's nest, and then the big tree's nest fell from the branches. Fortunately, the nest was fluffy, and there was a lot of snow where the nest fell, so it only shook a little, and the nest didn't break. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai couldn't help but walk over. As for Robins and Belle, they were dealing with the turkeys they hunted at this time. Walking to the side of the nest, Jiang Hai was surprised that there was something in the nest. At this time, there were 2 broken eggshells in the nest, and a bird with gray fluff. It looked like a black chicken, but it was much smaller than a black chicken. Jiang Hai looked at the bird in front of him, and couldn't help but be stunned. It wasn't because he recognized the species of the bird, but because it's so ugly. Squatting down, Jiang Hai picked up the bird from the nest. His eyes looked at the bird that was shivering from the cold, and he couldn't help but feel speechless. What's wrong, boss? At this time, Robins and Belle also tied up the turkey and happily walked over. When they walked to Jiang Hai's side, Robins couldn't help but pat Jiang Hai's shoulder and said to him with a smile. Belle, who was behind him, didn't have any problem, but looked directly at the thing in Jiang Hai's hand. Oh, boss, you dropped this thing's nest? Pointing at the young bird in Jiang Hai's hand, Belle asked with a look of surprise. Hearing his words, Robins also froze for a moment, then looked at the young bird in Jiang Hai's hand. He didn't look carefully just now, but when he saw it, he was also shocked. How did the boss get this bird down? No, just now when you shot, didn't you scare away a lot of birds? 2 thieves flew up from the grass over there. And when they flew up the tree, they accidentally knocked down the nest. I came over to take a look and found this thing inside. What is this thing? Why is it so ugly? Holding the little bird in his hand, Jiang Hai asked Belle, and the others strangely. This is the symbol of the United States. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robins couldn't help but cry and said helplessly. Today's second update, the editor told Little Fei that it was still early, but Little Fei has already posted 260,000 words. It seems to be a bit fast, so it can only be changed. From Monday to Friday, when there are many people, it will still be 2 updates, Saturday and Sunday. Depending on the situation, it may be 2 updates, or it may be 1 update. There are a lot of manuscripts, but it can't be published. Chapter 85. You said this is a bald sea eagle? Don't lie to me. I've seen the bald head sea eagle. In the picture, the bald head sea eagle is very handsome. How can it be as ugly as it is now? While playing with the clown bird in his hand, Jiang Hai said to Bale, it's really a bald sea eagle, the national bird of the United States. Our squadron accidentally shot down a nest with this thing in it. Although we later sent the nest back, it was still a virgin. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Belle said helplessly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at the bird in front of him. Is this really the national bird of the United States? But at this time, they should have migrated. Why is there still a young bird here? Rubbing his chin, Robins couldn't help but ask strangely. Every country has its own national symbol animal. For example, in Huaxia, the most famous animal is naturally the panda, and in the United States, the most famous animal is this bald sea eagle. Since 1782, the United States passed legislation to make the bald sea eagle the national bird of the United States and the symbol of the United States. The status of the bald sea eagle has always been high in the United States. This was similar to the status of pandas in Huaxia. Not to mention killing, buying, and selling these animals, just destroying their habitat was not a small crime. Not to mention that Bale and the others had once taken down the bird's nest. But just as Robin said, this kind of bird shouldn't appear here in this season. Although the bald sea eagle will nest in the rock walls and woods, if it perches in the nearby waters, it will not move again and will become a resident bird. But in fact, these bald sea eagles will still fly when they should, especially in the northern areas. In the south, more than 95% of the bald eagles would become resident birds, but in the north, most of the bald eagles would become migratory birds. They would fly away during the coldest months, and would only return in the spring of the next year. So Robins is a bit puzzled. Shouldn't these birds have flown away? Why is there a nest now, and there is a young bird in the nest? This made Robins, an old man here, a little puzzled. The bald eagle had once faced the threat of extinction. However, it was not because of human hunting. After all, their main habitat was in the United States. As the national bird of the United States, the Americans rarely hunted them. The reason why they went extinct was because of human beings. With the increase of fishing and logging, their habitat was constantly decreasing. Most importantly, because they lived at the top of the food chain. When humans used poisons such as pesticides, they would eventually be poisoned. In 1782, it was said that there were 100,000 bald eagles in the United States. However, shortly after the end of World War II, in 1963, there were only 417 pairs of bald eagles left in the world. However, with the recuperation in recent years, the bald eagle was removed from the list of 48 endangered wildlife species in the United States and gradually recovered its vitality. By 2003, the population had recovered to more than 7,600 pairs. Although it was still not as good as the 100,000 at its peak, it was still not bad. Another factor that led to the extinction of this bird is that this bird's reproductive ability is very weak. This bird only lays 2 eggs a year. However, it will not hatch 2 bald eagles, only 2 young birds. The one that is born first will eat the one that is born later as food. This means that a healthy bald eagle couple will only have 1 child a year. It takes at least 5 years for a bald eagle to grow up. 5 years is not much for a bald eagle that can live for 30 years. However, it is far less than the number of deaths, so this is one of the reasons why they almost went extinct. I think this bird is very likely to be the first bird to hatch. Before winter came, the 2 big birds had already left or were killed. After this bird hatched, it ate the little birds that hatched after it. That's how it survived until now. Looking at the little bird, Luo Binsi slowly analyzed the situation. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at the little bird. He didn't expect this simple little guy to be so cruel and merciless. He didn't even let his own brother go. Then can I raise him? After teasing for a while, Jiang Hai thought about it and said to Robbins, "It's up to you, boss. Although this bird is a first-class protected bird under the Washington Convention, as long as you don't sell and kill it, no one will care about you. Of course, you'd better go to the police station to file a case." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins shrugged and said with a look of approval. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was suddenly happy. Now he has no intention of hunting again. Placing the bird in his bosom, he hurried Robbins and Belle away. As Robbins said, there is nothing fun in this woodland here. When he has time, Jiang Hai can go to Alaska or other places to hunt. Those places are fun, not the forest where he is at home. Now that he has felt the joy of hunting, it is more important to implement the matter of the bald eagle. As a rich man a rich young man, it is inevitable to have eagles and dogs following him when he goes out. Now Jiang Hai has a dog, but he doesn't have an eagle. God gave him one. If he doesn't take it well, he will be punished by God. Sitting on a snowmobile, Jiang Hai, Robbins, and Belle quickly returned to their manor. After dealing with other things in the manor, Jiang Hai and the other 2 drove to the police station in the town. The police station in the town, in fact, has quite a lot of responsibility. It is like taking care of everything. This is why the police in the town look more powerful than the police in the big cities. However, these policemen can't be arrogant when they see Jiang Hai. After all, these guys owe Jiang Hai a favor. If Jiang Hai didn't show mercy at the end, they wouldn't even be able to keep their jobs. So after seeing the arrival of Jiang Hai, these policemen were very enthusiastic. The policewoman who interrogated him last time even took the initiative to make him a cup of coffee. But unfortunately, Jiang Hai is not interested in this kind of thing. Compared to coffee, he prefers to drink milk. Just like at home, he is either drinking beer or drinking milk. He almost doesn't touch coffee, so he doesn't know whether the coffee here is good or not. He just came to ask about the adoption of the eagle. The current chief of the police station, Maris Smith, specially came to help Jiang Hai with the things he needs to do. When he learned that Jiang Hai found an abandoned bald eagle in the forest of his home and wanted to adopt it, the old man began to flatter Jiang Hai, saying that Jiang Hai is kind and so on. Jiang Hai just smiled and didn't say much else. After that, it was very simple. The people from the pet center were called over to do a personal examination of the eagle. It was confirmed that the eagle has no other problems, except for some malnutrition. The police station also gave Jiang Hai a sign that can raise wild animals. Only with this thing, he will not be reported by others. After everything was done, Jiang Hai declined Maris Smith's proposal for dinner and returned home with Robbins and Belle. But after going back, Jiang Hai first gave the eagle a bath. Well, after the bath it still looks gray. Then he fed it a lot of premium beef. Then he squeezed out a drop of blood and fed it to the eagle. Originally, after the eagle was in Jiang Hai's hands, it had been looking around with fear in its eyes. Its body was constantly trembling, fearing that Jiang Hai would eat it. But after eating Jiang Hai's blood, it calmed down, and there was a trace of intelligence in its eyes. After rubbing Jiang Hai's hand, it fell asleep on Jiang Hai's bed. Jiang Hai knew that this was because the blood was transforming it. Just like the two dogs, after eating Jiang Hai's blood, they also fell into a dormant state. This eagle must be the same. He deliberately made a nest with some hay and some of his old clothes. After putting the eagle in, Jiang Hai breathed a sigh of relief. He looked back and saw the two dogs squatting there with their mouths open and a trace of curiosity in their eyes. Jiang Hai smiled gently and patted the heads of the two big dogs. From now on, this little guy will be our family. We can't bully it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two big dogs could not help but tilt their heads and look at Jiang Hai, then barked loudly. At this time little Condor, who was sleeping, couldn't help but move a little in fear after hearing the cry. Seeing little Condor's movement, Jiang Hai immediately gestured to the two dogs to keep quiet, and then looked at little Condor in the distance. Bang! At this moment, there was a sudden sound. Jiang Hai looked back and found that the waste bag he had just taken off had fallen to the ground. At this time, a small hole had been opened in the waste bag's zipper. Then a curious little head popped out from the gap of the waste bag and looked at the world in front of it curiously. When it saw Jiang Hai, it did not feel anything, but when it saw Little Black, it was instantly frightened and went back again. Little Black seemed to remember that he still had a grudge with this little guy. He could not help but walk over, open his mouth, and bared his teeth, threatening the little guy hiding in the bag. At this time, Jiang Hai remembered that he had brought back another one. Okay, don't scare this little guy. After kicking Xiaobai's butt, Jiang Hai walked over, picked up the waste bag, and casually opened the zipper. He wanted to take the little guy out. But at this moment, the little guy bit him. Today's update, please collect, please collect, please collect. Important things have to be said 3 times. Chapter 86. Bang! In a villa somewhere in the imperial capital, the door of a room was pushed open from the outside. A man in his 30s walked in from the outside with a face full of anger. As the door was opened, a dazzling ray of sunlight shone into the room. This made the man who was originally nestled on the bed couldn't help but powerlessly cover his eyes with his hand. Because in this room, it was pitch black at this time. Even the curtains in the room weren't pulled open. Looking at the man in front of him, the man who came in couldn't help but curse in his heart. Then he walked to the window next to him and pulled the curtains open again. What are you doing? More sunlight pierced in, which made the man on the bed couldn't help but roar angrily. He rubbed his hair that was like a chicken's nest and sat up from the bed all of a sudden. He looked at the man in front of him with a face full of anger. You're still alive. I thought you were already dead. I was going to call someone to collect your corpse. Looking at this man, the man on the other side couldn't help but sneer and say with a face full of anger. Hearing this person's words, the man on the other side was stunned for a moment. Then he returned to his calm appearance. Without wearing any clothes, he sat up from the bed with his upper body naked. Then, he touched a wine bottle at the head of the bed and drank without saying a word. Through the sunlight outside the window, it could be seen that the entire room was unusually dirty and messy. Clothes, food, wine bottles, garbage were thrown everywhere. But this man didn't seem to care about these at all. He just opened his eyes and started drinking again. You still have the nerve to drink. Seeing this man's appearance, the man on the other side was even more angry. He took a step forward and slapped the wine bottle in his hand away. Seeing this person's appearance, The man lying on the bed couldn't help but be angry. He instantly stood up, grabbed the man's collar with both hands, and looked at him with red eyes. "I'm not drinking. What can I do if I don't drink?" Facing the man in front of him, the man roared loudly. "What do you want to do? Fulfill your responsibility as the second young master, and don't be so drunk all day." Staring at the man in front of him with red eyes, the man said word by word. "Responsibility? Vulsh *T responsibility. The last time you said this, you asked me to betray the woman I love the most. What business? Vulsh *T business. You took her away from me forever. Now you want to talk about responsibility with me? What do we have to talk about?" Hearing this man's words, the man roared loudly as if he had gone mad. "Don't say those useless things to me. I'm doing this for my family. If I'm given another chance, I'll do it again. And if it weren't for you, the Chi Group would have become a subsidiary of our company long ago. It wouldn't be like this now. Do you know how much the woman in your heart has just made us lose? 500 million yuan, a whole 500 million yuan. With 500 million yuan, how many women can you find?" Hearing the man's words, the man opposite him roared in anger. He pushed the man away with a cold look on his face. "Don't fantasize anymore. That woman is already married. I'll give you 5 minutes to take care of yourself. Father and I will wait for you in the hall. This time, don't let us down again." Adjusting his tie, the man said coldly and then left the room. At this time, the man lying on the bed slowly stood up like a walking corpse. But from his trembling hands and lifeless eyes, it could be seen how unwilling he was. "Dad, I took back that project." At the same time, in the president's office of the Chi Group, Chili was smiling and stroking a family photo. This family photo was taken when she had just returned from studying abroad. There were a total of 5 people in the photo: Chili, Chili's parents, and 2 sisters who looked younger than Chili. These 2 were Chili's younger sisters. However, Jiang Hai had never seen these 2 people before. He only heard that the elder sister was not born to Chili's mother. Men became bad when they were rich, so they had an illegitimate daughter. They only brought her home when she was 10 years old. Since childhood, the relationship between her and the Chi family was not very good. Later, because Chili angered her father to death, they broke off contact with her. At this time, she was doing some research in the United States. The younger sister was only 20 years old this year. Jiang Hai had seen her once when she was young. She had been weak and sick since childhood, and couldn't stand the bumps in the road. It could be said that the pressure of the Chi family was now on Chi Li's shoulders. Next, we'll have to face the Yin family's counterattack. After a long while, Chi Li put the photo back on her desk. Then, she took off her shoes and curled up on the sofa behind her like an injured bird. It was hard to imagine that President Chi, who was incomparably tough in front of others, could have such a weak side. Of course, this had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. It was said that husband and wife were birds in the same forest. When disaster struck, they would fly away separately. Moreover, Jiang Hai did not think that they had been husband and wife for even a day. After all, for more than a year, except for when they changed their wedding rings, Jiang Hai had not touched anything else. However, this was quite in line with the current requirements. Holding hands was not allowed to be described. At this moment, Jiang Hai was lying on his bed and looking in the distance at the little condor and the snow squirrel, who were fighting over a nest. It had been 4 days since he went hunting. After being bitten by the snow squirrel that day, Jiang Hai had no choice but to bleed again. The squirrel's front teeth could even bite open acorns, let alone Jiang Hai's skin. Originally, he had not thought of raising this fella. This time, he had to raise it even if he did not want to. After 2 days, these 2 fellas finally digested Jiang Hai's blood. After being nourished by the blood, these 2 fellas were much more intelligent than before. As they became smarter, their strength and bodies were also slowly changing. At least in terms of physical strength, Jiang Hai was ashamed of his inferiority. For example, snatching nests. This was what they were most willing to do at the moment. At first, Jiang Hai interfered, but then he gave up. He let these 2 little guys snatch the nests. As long as they didn't lose their lives, he was too lazy to take care of them. As for the 2 new guests, Jiang Hai had already given them names yesterday. The young white-headed sea eagle. Jiang Hai called it chirp chirp, because its chirping sound was chirp 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 chirp. As for the snow-ground squirrel, what was it? Squeak squeak? Impossible. How could Jiang Hai, who was so good at naming, have such an old-fashioned name like Squeak Squeak? Therefore Jiang Hai named it Front Teeth, because he could see the snow squirrel's big front teeth at a glance. Jiang Hai still liked these two names very much. It was very suitable, wasn't it? After the two fellas woke up, Jiang Hai spent a day settling them down. Of course it was mainly to feed them. Then Jiang Hai discovered that it had started to snow outside. At first it was only a light snow, but after Jiang Hai had dinner at Mrs. Philomon's house, the light snow turned into a moderate snow. And when he woke up this morning, the moderate snow turned into a heavy snow. Boston really loved snow. Snow was the same as rain. It referred to the high altitude of the sky, when cold air met hot air, and then produced water vapor. However, before the water vapor could turn into water droplets, it was frozen into snowflakes and fell from the sky. Compared to other areas in the north, such as inland areas, Boston was close to the Atlantic Ocean. The oceanic climate was stronger, so there were many monsoons. Because of this, it was rainy in summer and snowy in winter. Moreover, the wind was not small. This snow lasted for an entire day. It was light for a while, but after lunch, it became heavy again. Humans are very lazy creatures. Take Jiang Hai for example. When it snows or rains, he doesn't want to move. When he saw so many snowflakes this morning, he was already unwilling to move. In the morning, he endured his laziness and went to the stable to get some fodder and carrots for Great Xia. After that he didn't go out. He even made lunch at home. Now it was almost night, but the wind and snow outside didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. It was really boring to stay at home on a snowy day, especially since he was already very bored. He lay there every day like a stinking salted fish, watching anime, watching TV, watching American dramas, watching the NBA, and playing games. A day passed just like that. When it wasn't snowing, Jiang Hai would go out to exercise. Now that it was snowing, he felt that his laziness had grown again. Now he was so bored that he was watching chirps and die teeth fight for a nest. It was obvious that this salted fish was almost done drying. Bang bang bang. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Jiang Hai stood up curiously and looked out from the window. He saw Philomon standing outside the door with a box. Wait for me. Seeing that it was Philomon, Jiang Hai yelled at him, then ran downstairs and opened the door. Phew, the snow outside is so heavy. I guess there's going to be an early warning in Boston. As soon as the door was opened, Philomon flashed in. When Jiang Hai took the box in his hand, he kept patting the snow on his body. We're not in Boston. No matter how heavy the snow is, it has nothing to do with us. Let's just wait for the snow to stop, and then clear the snow. What's inside? Is it food? Hearing what Philomon said, Jiang Hai chuckled, then shook the box in his hand and asked strangely. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Philomon couldn't help but laugh. Yeah, my wife specially made this for you. She said that you can't take the money and not work. While it's still hot, I brought it over. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Philip also smiled and said. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's heart couldn't help but feel moved. Looking at the lunchbox in his hand, Jiang Hai's heart, that was originally cold from boredom, gradually warmed up. Today's second update, continuously delivered. Chapter 87. My wife said that you can eat whatever you want at home at noon. If you eat whatever you want at night, she will be too embarrassed to charge you. Watching Jiang Hai devouring the stewed beef in the lunchbox like a whirlwind, Philomon said with a smile. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled. No matter what the reason was, in such a cold day, there was someone who was thinking about him. This was also a warm thing in his heart. In the past year, he had been used to being alone. During the new year, he was by himself. During the holidays, he was by himself. When it came to doing things, he was by himself. His friends also had their own things to do. They had to go to work and accompany their parents, relatives, and family. Therefore, Jiang Hai couldn't often harass them. Since his parents passed away, Jiang Hai originally thought that his future pillar of support might be Qi Li, but reality slapped him in the face. His future pillar of support was actually only himself. People were very accustomed to adapting. After a year of adaptation, Jiang Hai had already adapted to being alone. Originally, he came to the United States to open a manor, not to make money. Of course, people like money, but his purpose was not for money. If it was really for money, the $330 million would be enough for him to spend for several lifetimes. There was no need to do this at all. His only purpose now was to explore the mystery of the tattoo on his body. Therefore, when he bought the manor, he didn't care too much. He didn't even cut the price. Of course, there was no way to cut the price in the auction house. Compared to private manor owners, things in the auction house couldn't be cut. The price was set at the price. There was no such thing as being cheaper or giving a discount. From the beginning, Jiang Hai was very clear about this, so he didn't say much and directly spent money to buy it. When he first bought it, he was still worried. Although he was the boss, he was an outsider after all. He was really afraid that Robbins and the others would gang up to deceive him. At that time, he would be unfamiliar with the place and people, and it would be really difficult. But in fact, Robbins and the others were really good people. They didn't say that everything was for Jiang Hai's sake, but they really treated Jiang Hai very well. Whether it was in their daily life or professional life, they didn't let Jiang Hai find the slightest bit of selfishness and stealing behavior. This made Jiang Hai very satisfied. Robbins, Burke-Dollar, Philip, Harriman, and Bell always paid attention to Jiang Hai intentionally or inadvertently. They taught him how to grade beef, how to raise cows, how to raise horses, how to brush their hair, how to train dogs, how to pick, and so on. They also reminded Jiang Hai at any time, which made Jiang Hai feel like family. As for Ai Dehua, he had been teaching Jiang Hai how to distinguish the fish in the sea, how to catch fish, how to cast the net, what to do if the fish were poisonous or harmful, and what to do if he met others at sea. Originally, when Jiang Hai came, he didn't know anything. He just read a novel on the spur of the moment and came. But when he really owned a manor, he found that even if he had a golden finger, it was really difficult to play around. As a layman, it would take at least 1 or 2 years for him to become an expert. The employer-employee relationship between Jiang Hai and his subordinates made Jiang Hai very happy. The feeling of being humane was really great. "Boss, you must be quite bored recently." Seeing Jiang Hai gobbling up the food in the incubator, Philip helped him clean up and said to him with a smile. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but think. It seemed that he was indeed a little bored. Originally, before it snowed outside, he actually had something to do every day. At least in the morning, he had something to do. He could go out for a jog or do some boxing. But since it snowed, he seemed to have nothing to do. "It is quite boring." Nodding, Jiang Hai said with a look of agreement. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Philip looked at the sky outside and said with a smile, "This snow will probably last until tomorrow. If it stops tomorrow, we will shovel the snow tomorrow. Then the day after tomorrow, I will take you out to play." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Philip looked at the sky outside and said with a smile, "Play? Play what? I heard that there is a striptease club here. I haven't been there since I came here. Do you want to take me there?" Hearing Philip's words, Jiang Hai immediately asked. For a man who can only rely on his left and right, going to find a woman is the most fun thing. "Cough, if I dare to go, Vic will kill me. If Vic doesn't kill me, Ai Dehua will kill me. Haha, I mean fishing. Hearing Philip's words, Jiang Hai was a little disappointed, but then he became energetic again. "Fishing, going to the sea?" Blinking, looking at Philip, Jiang Hai asked curiously. "No, not to the sea, to the river." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Philip shook his head. "River? Don't you guys not eat river fish?" Thinking of the big carp that he brought back last time, Jiang Hai still felt that it was a pity. But later, because of him, he also brought back a few fish. But to be honest, the way the Chinese made fish, these Americans would not like to eat it. The only fish that they liked to eat were probably only 2 kinds, sweet and sour fish, and Westlake sweet and sour fish. Sweet and sour fish is basically made with carp in China, but because these guys are not picky about the bones, they use bass and mandarin fish. The cooking method is almost the same as squirrel mandarin fish. First, the fish is fried, and then cooked with a prepared sweet and sour sauce. In huaxia restaurants in the United States, this dish is quite popular. Secondly, wake up lake sweet and sour fish. To be honest, Jiang Hai, a pure northerner, doesn't like to eat it very much. This fish is steamed or boiled, and after it is cooked, sweet and sour sauce is put on it. Although it is a representative of Zhejiang cuisine, Jiang Hai has an impulse to die after eating it. It's really terrible, and it's not to his taste at all. Therefore, he basically only makes two kinds of fish, one is stewed, and the other is braised. The most famous food in the Northeast, stewed fish in an iron pot, tastes really good, but unfortunately it's too salty. These Westerners can't eat salty things, so they can't stand it at all. Braised fish can't be bland either. After all, braising requires soy sauce and salt. These people can't stand it. Actually, it's not that we don't eat river fish, but we don't eat Asian carp. We still eat other fish. With an awkward smile, Philemon also said with a smile. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but nod. In the rivers of the United States, there are not only Asian carp, but also many local fish, and these local fish are also eaten by Westerners and Americans. Well, take me to see it when the time comes. Hearing Philemon's words, Jiang Hai said with a happy face. The night was silent, and the next morning, the snow really stopped. After a day and 2 nights, the snow was not thin, nearly 20 centimeters thick. When Jiang Hai went out wearing a coat, the snow was already up to his ankles. As for robins and others, they have been waiting there for a long time. Today's snow is much more troublesome than that day. Although it's only twice as thick, it's enough to keep them busy until the evening. This time, both sides of the ski resort are almost full, and a lot of snow has been pushed into the sea. The sea won't freeze in winter, of course, except for the North Pole and the South Pole. But Boston is obviously not that cold. After a busy day, Jiang Hai and others also went back to rest. But before leaving, Jiang Hai clearly remembered that Philemon said that they are going fishing. Hearing that Jiang Hai wants to go fishing in the river, Harriman was also very interested. Harriman is different from ordinary children. Because of the trauma he suffered when he was young, his life is not very good. Although he often has neighbors to help him, he can't always rely on them to live. Sometimes he is very hungry, so in terms of the ability to find wild food, Harriman is worthy of being called an ability user. Early the next morning, when Jiang Hai got up from the warm bed, Philemon and Harriman had already finished patrolling the boundary of the manor. At the same time, each of them carried a bucket, waiting for Jiang Hai there. You came really early. What's in this bucket? Where are your fishing rods? Seeing the two people coming over, Jiang Hai chuckled and asked with an excited look. He has prepared everything today, including fishing rods, fishing lines, fishing hooks, composite bait, and so on. Boss, we're going to break the ice to fish today, so we don't need fishing rods. There's a layer of ice between you and the fish, so they can't see you. As for the bait in the bucket, you'll know when you get there. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Philemon couldn't help laughing. He forgot to tell Jiang Hai. Oh, I see. Hearing Philemon's words, Jiang Hai curled his lips and returned the fishing rod. Finally, according to Philemon's instructions, he took the thickest fishing line and a lot of hooks and ran back to Philemon. Then the three people drove an F-750 out of the manor and headed straight for a small river not far from Winthrop Town. This small river was actually a branch of a river fork. It was very narrow, only about 100 meters wide. However, the water was not submerged. Perhaps because of the constant erosion, the deepest part of the river was more than 10 meters deep. Perhaps because of the good air, a middle school in Winthrop Town was located beside this river fork. The basketball court of the high school was only a few dozen meters away from the river. Since it was so close to a populated area, it was obvious that this river fork was not a good place to fish. However, safety was the most important thing for Philip and his friends. Today's update has almost reached 5,000 favorites. Although it won't be on the shelves next week, it will be recommended on the homepage this week. Please support it. If you like it, please add it. Chapter 88. Winter in North America was the time when the crime rate was the highest. The weather was cold, and the roads were slippery. If someone committed a crime in the suburbs during other seasons, the police would arrive in 3 minutes. But during this season, the police might not even arrive in 13 minutes. Therefore, this was also the season that the thugs liked the most. However, compared to his little brother Canada, the United States was still much better. This was because they had more people and more workers. Therefore, there were some small roads that could not be cleared in time. However, the main roads were cleared very quickly. On the other hand, Canada had a total of 35 million people and occupied the second largest land area in the world. That was because the land was vast and the population was sparse. In Canada, the cleaners had the highest salary. But even so, they still couldn't find enough cleaners. There were too few of them. Hence, it wasn't easy to clean the main roads in Canada. It was still okay in the city, but once they left the city, it was a world of white everywhere. Therefore, although Philip and Jiang Hai were not afraid of trouble, there was no need to cause trouble. They came out to play and safety came first. Therefore, they chose the river nearby. After all, it was very close to Winthrop. What? The river was close to people, but there were no fish in the river? There was no need to consider this. Where was this place? The U.S. They did not eat river fish. As long as there was water, there would be no shortage of fish. After Jiang Hai waited for the 3 people to park the car, he took the things out of the car. Halamon was very happy. Obviously, since he had a stable job, he hadn't come to play for a while. He was very happy. He took out a sledgehammer and iron fiber from the car and went to open the ice. Breaking the ice was actually very particular. It didn't mean that you could directly smash a hole in the ice to fish. If you didn't smash the hole well, it would be easy to crack the ice cover. At that time, if you fell in, it would be troublesome. That was why breaking the ice was also a technical job. Those who had not done it before would not know how to do it. You need to first break the ice with iron filaments, cut it open, and then use iron claws to dig out the ice from the hole. Jiang Hai was no stranger to this kind of action. As an ordinary citizen of Ice City, every winter when he passed by the riverside of Ice City, he would often see a lot of people trying to get ice from some of the more remote places. Jiang Hai was not unfamiliar with this kind of action. As an ordinary citizen of Ice City, every winter when he passed by the river, he would often see many people trying to get ice from some of the more remote places. Otherwise, where do you think those ice lanterns and ice sculptures came from? But even if he knew, he had done it before. Fortunately, Philip and Harriman were veterans. It didn't take long for the ice to be dug out. It was a square ice cave with a diameter of about 1.5 meters. For Jiang Hai and the others, it was enough. After the ice hole was opened, Philip started a fire on the ice wall next to them to roast them. The fire on the ice would not melt it. But if they sat on the ice wall for a long time, they would freeze. It was more comfortable to roast them with a fire. After Philip started the fire, Halamon was ready to cast the bait. In fact, breaking the ice to fish is very easy for North Americans, because they only need to break the ice and get some bait to attract the Asian carp from the upper layer. Just like now, Jiang Hai clearly saw the shadow of a few fish passing through the water. But Americans don't eat Asian carp, so they don't break the ice to catch this kind of fish. As for the native fish in the United States, it would take some time to catch these good fish. These are the bait. Seeing Jiang Hai looking over, Halamon smiled at Jiang Hai. Then he opened the 2 barrels beside him. But as soon as he opened them, Jiang Hai felt like vomiting. This was because the 2 barrels were densely packed with insects. One of the barrels had a variety of insects. Some looked like centipedes, but their bodies were soft. Some looked like earthworms, but they were much bigger than earthworms. Looking at them, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel disgusted. The other barrel was also full of insects, but they were all bundled together. Jiang Hai didn't know what to do with them. The other barrel was also full of insects, but they were all bundled together. Seeing this, Jiang Hai's scalp tingled. He unconsciously took 2 steps back. Don't be afraid, they don't bite. Seeing Jiang Hai take a step back, Halamon couldn't help but smile. As he spoke, he put his hand into one of the barrels and grabbed an insect with legs. Then he took out a syringe from his backpack and injected air into the insect's body. In an instant, the insect swelled up like a balloon. It's okay, these insects are harmless to us. This barrel is full of clam worms. Halamon, and I caught them in the morning. These are ship maggots. Ai Dahua specially raised them for fishing. When he heard that we were coming today, he gave us some. At this time, Philip walked over and said with a smile. In fact, whether it was clam worms or ship maggots, they were good for fishing. Especially clam worms. They were called all-purpose bait. In the south of Huaxia in Southeast Asia, these two kinds of insects could be eaten. But Jiang Hai couldn't stand them. In the past, Jiang Hai could only catch earthworms at most. It was hard for him to get over this kind of thing. Well, I'll help you put it on and you fish. At this time, Halamon seemed to have realized that Jiang Hai was not easy to get over. So he handed the fishing line to Jiang Hai with a smile. Seeing that Halamon had done it for him, Jiang Hai smiled embarrassedly. He didn't refuse, but directly sat on the bench brought by Halamon and started to fish in the ice cave. But he sat in the position furthest away from the two barrels of insects. While waiting to fish, he carefully looked at the two barrels over there, for fear that they would overturn and the insects would run over. Obviously, he thought too much. It was like being afraid of heights. Standing at a high place, he always felt that he would fall. Jiang Hai was afraid of insects, so when he sat here, he always felt that the insects would climb up to him. It was the same. Boss, put the license on your chest or arm. This place is close to the town. If the police come and see us fishing, it will be easy to scare the fish away. Just when Jiang Hai was scared out of his wits, Halamon and Philemon had already put their bait into the water. But after putting the bait into the water, Philemon deliberately said something to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai immediately took out a card from his pocket. In the United States, fishing was a little different from China. In the United States, fishing needed to apply for a license, otherwise, it would be illegal and would be put in jail. Every year, the United States would have the so-called freshwater fishing season. During this time, fishing and other activities were not allowed. Of course, as long as you were not discovered by others, no one would care about you. In particular, Jiang Hai's main target was Asian carp, which could be fished all year round. But now they were not here to catch Asian carp, but to catch more valuable fish. Perhaps because the weather was too cold, the fish underwater not only moved slower, but also needed to eat a lot less. This was why most cold water fish were smaller than tropical fish. That was because they ate all year round, while cold water fish ate for 8 months and starved for 4 months. It would be strange if they grew bigger. After about half an hour or so, the temptation of the clamworms was really strong. The lazy fish finally couldn't bear it anymore. Jiang Hai instantly felt the clam sink into his hand. Then, his powerful strength was undoubtedly displayed at this time. In an instant, he pulled the fish out of the water. He threw the fish on the ice beside him. After the fish landed on the ice, it continued to struggle, wanting to jump back into the water, but Jiang Hai, who was already prepared, pressed down on its head and lifted it up. Oh, what a good start. It's actually a brown trout. Philip couldn't help but laugh when he saw Jiang Hai pull the fish out of the water. It's really good stuff. Jiang Hai was so happy that he almost closed his mouth when he saw the 40-centimeter long fish in front of him. Speaking of the brown trout, people who weren't familiar with fish might not be very clear about it. However, speaking of the brown trout's brother, the rainbow trout, many people probably knew about it. These two kinds of fish were both in the trout family. As long as they were in the trout family, the price would be extraordinarily high. At the same weight, it would not be a problem for a brown trout to be dozens of times more expensive than a carp. After removing the hook, Jiang Hai smiled and threw the fish into the insulated tank that he had prepared beforehand. This was a really good start. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai felt that the clam worms and ship maggots were not so terrible. This time, he took the initiative to go over and pick a clam worm that didn't look so ugly. He sat back in his seat, pumped up the hook, and threw it into the water. The animal was done in one go. Seeing Jiang Hai's happy look, Philip and Harriman couldn't help but laugh. At the same time, They focused on feeling the vibration in their hands. Not long after, Harriman also caught a fish. He caught a North American pike. This fish, which was originally the king of freshwater river basins in North America, had been suppressed by Asian carp to the point that there was almost no room for it to survive. However, it was undeniable that this kind of fish tasted very good. This North American pike was about the same length as Jiang Hai's brown trout, more than 40 centimeters, which made Harriman very happy. At this time, Philip also caught a fish. It had to be said that the older the ginger, the spicier it was. The fish that Philip caught might not be as expensive as Jiang Hai's brown trout and Harriman's pike, but its weight and length were definitely the highest. He caught a large river bass. Jiang Hai knew at a glance that the weight of this fish was definitely not less than 5 kilograms. Today's second update is continuously delivered. Please support me. Chapter 89. Phew, it's really cold outside. Facing the howling north wind, Philemon opened the door of his house and walked in. He stood on the carpet at the door and stomped the snow around his feet. At the same time, he patted the snow on his body with his gloves. Although it hasn't snowed for many days, Boston's sub-zero temperature and the howling north wind would always cause some trouble for the cowboys in Jiang Hai's manor every morning. For example, the road was frozen, the snow was blown everywhere, and the points on the roof were all over the place. "You're back, let's eat." Seeing Philemon come back, the voice of Mrs. Philemon, who was still busy in the kitchen, came from inside. Then she smiled and brought out a plate of fried fish and a basket of bread. "Fish again?" Philemon walked to the front of the dining table and looked at the fried golden fish in front of him with an ugly expression. This was already his 8th consecutive meal of fish. Although he didn't vomit, he was a cowboy, not a fisherman. The reason why he didn't choose to be a fisherman was that he couldn't stand the loneliness at sea. Eating fish every day was also the thing he disliked the most. "What are you talking about? The fish at home can be sold. What else can we eat if not fish?" Mrs. Philemon rolled her eyes at Philemon and said unhappily. In recent days, she had been eating fish and was a little tired of it. "Sigh, if I had known, I wouldn't have taught the boss that fishing method." Shaking his head with a wry smile, Philemon said helplessly. He picked up the fork in front of him and poked the fish in front of him. The outside was fried golden, and the inside was snow white. It looked really good. If it was served with the sweet and sour sauce they specially made, it was somewhat similar to a mixed version of jalapeno sauce and ketchup. It was actually very delicious, but no matter how delicious it was, no one could stand it for several days. "Where's the boss?" Looking at the fish in front of him, Philemon sighed and stuffed it directly into his mouth, then raised his head and asked his wife beside him. At this time, Jiang Hai should also be eating here. He went fishing again. Hearing Philemon's words, Mrs. Philemon crossed her arms and said angrily, "Sigh, what a sin." Hearing that Jiang Hai went fishing again, Philemon really wanted to die now. Since he and Harriman taught Jiang Hai how to break the ice to fish, Jiang Hai has been deeply obsessed with this game. In fact, it was understandable. In winter, Jiang Hai really had nothing to do, so it wasn't right for him to stay at home and play all day long. People always needed to exercise, and fishing seemed like a good exercise to him. After he finished fishing with Philemon and Harriman that day, he came back after lunch the next day. Originally, he hated clam worm and chuanming, but now, he didn't hate them as much. He carried a small bucket and wouldn't go back unless it was time for dinner. For so many days, he had been fishing there every day. Jiang Hai couldn't throw away the fish that he caught, so he could only bring them back and give them to Mrs. Philemon. Although these river fish could be raised for a while, they wouldn't last long and would eventually die. Therefore, Mrs. Philemon could only cook the fish before they died. As the boss of the manor, Jiang Hai's wife naturally had to cook the fish differently. After all, she was the one who paid him. However, it wasn't a good thing for Philemon. Those dying fish basically entered his stomach after being cooked. Fish was indeed delicious, but compared to beef, it was needless to say which one tasted better. These days, Jiang Hai would bring back at least 4 or 5 fish every day, sometimes even 6 or 7. It was impossible for someone like him to release the fish that he caught. Of course, the fish that were too small were counted separately, but those that were too small were basically used as bait. After all, there were many fish that ate meat in this river. Jiang Hai only rested for a while on Thanksgiving Day. These days, Jiang Hai had sent a lot of fish to the other families. However, the one that received the most fish was naturally his own canteen, Mrs. Philemon's. However, the amount of fish that was sent wasn't as much as the amount that he ate. This was inevitable. What a sin! Philemon sighed again as he continued to eat. While Philemon was fighting with the fish that Jiang Hai caught, Jiang Hai drove his F-650 to the riverside that he usually guarded. After a night and a morning, a layer of ice had appeared in the original ice cave. Although Boston was much colder than Bing City, the wind here was strong, and the temperature here was not warmer than Bing City. Let's get out. After parking the car, Jiang Hai got out of the car with the things that he needed. Then, Xiaobai and Xiaobai also got out of the car from the back seat. Ever since he did not bring Philemon and the rest with him, Xiaobai and Xiaohuang had become Jiang Hai's fishing partners. These two dogs were very interested in coming out to play. On Xiaobai's back was a little squirrel. It was Dai Teeth. Qiuqiu was still too young. Almost every day besides sleeping and eating, she could do nothing else. After Dai Teeth fought with it for a nest many times to no avail, it gave up because Jiang Hai made a new nest for it. It was made of wood and was fixed to the wall next to it. A layer of bark was placed on the outside of the wall. Compared to the nest made of clothes and weeds, Dai Teeth obviously preferred his new nest. Therefore, the battle for the nest that had been going on for a long time came to an end. After confirming its own territory, Dai Teeth became more ambitious. When he saw that Jiang Hai always brought Xiaobai and Xiaohuang outside, he also wanted to come. Jiang Hai did not mind, as long as Dai Teeth did not get lost. Carrying a bunch of things, the three animals came to the river. Jiang Hai first made a fire, and the three animals and one person sat around the fire. As for Jiang Hai, after removing the layer of ice, he took out a small bucket of ship maggots and hung them on a hook. Compared to clamworms, ship maggots have an advantage over Jiang Hai, because from a biological point of view, ship maggots are not maggots, nor are they insects. They belong to the clam family, which is the shellfish family. Although they look infinitely like insects, they are not. This made the barrier in Jiang Hai's heart drop a lot. This kind of ship maggot mainly fed on wood. In the era when ships were mainly made of wood, this kind of creature could be called the greatest enemy of ships. Countless warships and merchant ships were destroyed by its hands. At the same time, those wooden piers were unavoidable. Therefore, at one time, it was the creature that sailors wanted to get rid of the most. There was no other choice. However, later on, as ships entered the era of metal and fiberglass, ship maggots no longer had a place to live. As for the docks, generally speaking, there were very few wooden docks now. For example, Jiang Hai's gravity pier was made of soil and reinforced concrete. Even if there was a wooden structure, it was wrapped in cement, so ship maggots naturally had no space to live. These ship maggots were raised by Edward Anderson using wood. These ship maggots were not only edible, but they were also good for fishing. After all, they were clams. As bottom feeders, there were many creatures that liked to eat them. Not only did they like to eat fish, but they also liked to eat prawns and crabs. They were good for fishing. However, compared to clamworms, ship maggots were not as easy to find, and their effect was not as good as clamworms. After all, clamworms were the legendary all-purpose bait. However, Jiang Hai would rather use ship maggots than clamworms, because he had no resistance against worms. These days, he realized that the original freshwater fishes in North America were quite powerful. Most of the fishes were carnivorous and had rows of teeth. But why couldn't these carnivorous fishes beat the toothless Asian carp? It's very puzzling. But then again, the taste of these fishes is really quite good. They have few bones and big chunks of meat. They're not worse than deep-sea fishes. They're even softer than deep-sea fishes. Recently, Jiang Hai has also seen a lot of fishes. There were dozens of species of fish in this river alone. Among them, there were more than a dozen species of bass. There were striped bass, white bass, hybrid wolf bass, yellow wolf bass, largemouth black bass, smallmouth black bass, spotted black bass, white bass, yellow bass, pike bass, big-eye pike bass, hybrid pike bass, etc. There were also bowfin fish, buffalo fish, rouge fish, gully catfish, blue catfish, flathead catfish, bighead catfish, and stonefish. Most of these fish were marine fish. The most famous one should be the yellow flower, but there were also freshwater stonefish in the United States. The taste was not much different from the yellow flower. There were also yarrow pike fish, which were also divided into white spotted dog and North American dog, sucker fish, sunfish, and the same exotic species, African carp, the legendary tilapia, and so on. It could be said that the original freshwater ecosystem of North America was really rich in fish species. Unfortunately, it was now crowded by carp, mediocre fish, spotted silver carp, fathead, white carp, black carp, grass carp, and so on. There was no space for survival. The entire upper level of the river was basically these fish. There was almost no need to fish. Just throw some bait, such as breadcrumbs, and wait on the side with a fishing net. Even in winter, if one did not catch 1 or 20 fish a day, it would be embarrassing to say that one was eliminating the pest. It was not that Jiang Hai worshipped foreign things. Sometimes carp, fathead, and so on were delicious, but more often, these local fish were better, especially Jiang Hai sometimes caught trout. This was the king of freshwater fish. The taste was naturally excellent, and could even be compared to the legendary Atlantic salmon. Today, Jiang Hai came to the river with such a mood. After getting everything ready, Jiang Hai threw the hook into the river and began to wait patiently. Jiang Hai was now fishing and killing time. In recent days, he was half a veteran, so he probably knew when these fish would bite. It was almost impossible for them to bite in the first 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, it was very likely he needed to be more careful. As a foodie, writing about a manor was naturally mainly about eating and drinking. Isn't this the main theme of a manor? Chapter 90. It's coming. After 20 minutes, Jiang Hai's originally indifferent expression instantly became serious. His half-asleep eyes also instantly focused. From the change in his gaze, it could be seen that Jiang Hai was now serious. Through his strong perception, Jiang Hai could roughly imagine the situation underwater through the line. There were definitely fish underwater, and after such a long time, the ship maggot should have attracted some fish to watch from the side. But these fish were very careful. They would not be easily fooled, but looking at the constantly twisting maggot in front of them, it was impossible to say that they were not greedy. Now it was a battle between rationality and instinct. If the maggot continued twisting, some fish would not be able to resist. However, if Jiang Hai moved recklessly now, it was very likely that he would scare the fish away. Finally, a fish could not stand it anymore, but it was still very careful. It slowly swam over, gently bit the bait, and immediately released it to escape. This was because Jiang Hai felt the money in his hand vibrate. At this time, Jiang Hai's heartbeat slowed down. He knew that if there were no accidents, this fish was already in his bag. Then another minute passed, and the line trembled again. Then half a minute, 20 seconds. Jiang Hai had a vague feeling that the next time, this fish would definitely bite the bait. Moreover, through the last test, Jiang Hai clearly felt that this fish was not a small one, but a really big one. According to Jiang Hai's estimation, it was at least half a meter long and weighed more than 10 kilograms. This fish was enough for him to eat. Wow! However, just as the fish was about to bite the bait, a burst of cheers suddenly erupted from the high school's gymnasium in the distance. Hearing the sound of the explosion, the fish underwater instantly fled in all directions. Oh, who the F***? Feeling that the water was instantly emptied, and that his half an hour was completely wasted, Jiang Hai could not help but swear. He lifted the fishing line again, looked at the gymnasium in the distance, and finally shook his head, ready to continue. However, he had to wait again. But it seemed that the other party was not going to let him have an easy time today. The cheers came one after another, which also made Jiang Hai feel that his head was about to explode. What are these guys doing? Why are they not going to school? I'll go and see what these guys are going to do. Jiang Hai casually threw his things aside and strode to the gymnasium. As for Xiao Bai and Xiao Huang, after seeing Jiang Hai leave, they ignored him. If Jiang Hai opened the car door, they would definitely stand up. But now that Jiang Hai was only going to the gymnasium, and nothing was going on, they were too lazy to move. These days, Jiang Hai often went to the gymnasium, not to do anything but to go to the toilet. At first, they would follow him, but now they were too lazy to follow him. Anyway, they went to the toilet, and they did not need to go to the toilet. Outside the gymnasium, Jiang Hai heard the cheers louder than when he was by the river, which made Jiang Hai feel a little strange. Because today was the third day, these students should be in school. Who would be so free to come here to practice cheering? With a feeling of curiosity, Jiang Hai walked into the gymnasium. As soon as he walked in, the noise became even louder. In his eyes, at this time, the gymnasium was not full of people, but there were at least a few hundred people. And what made these people cheer was a game in the middle of the field. This was a 3-on-3 basketball game. No, rather than a basketball game, it was better to say that it was a coaching game, because among the 6 people on the field, 5 of them were high school students, and only one was black. Obviously, he was not a high school student, and his strength was much stronger than these high school students. Not only was his physical fitness stronger, but his skills were also perfect. Under his defense, almost none of the players he faced could easily score. And when he scored, no one could stop him except himself. Seeing this situation, Jiang Hai could not help but shake his head. He did not understand at all what was so fun about this, but it seemed that this kind of performance would not last long. Hey, why are you here? Just as Jiang Hai was hesitating there whether to wait for these people to finish playing, and then go fishing, or go home directly, at this time, in the distance, a girl in a cheerleading uniform saw him at a glance, and then she ran over with 2 flowers in her hand with a happy face. Seeing this girl, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, because he didn't seem to know this girl. Then he thought about it carefully. It seemed that he had seen her twice. He didn't remember the name of this girl, but it seemed that she was the daughter of the owner of the horse ranch. I came here to fish. You guys are too noisy here. You scared my fish away. Why are you here? Don't you go to school in Boston? Hearing the girl's words, Jiang Hai tried to remember. Although he couldn't remember her name, Jiang Hai remembered that this girl seemed to be in high school in Boston. How could she appear here? We are on vacation. It's winter vacation now. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl said with a smile, "Oh, is that so? The holidays in the United States are naturally different from those in China. In the United States, in addition to public holidays such as Saturday, Sunday, Independence Day, and National Day, there are a total of 4 holidays a year. The first is the longest summer vacation, which is from June to September every year. That is June, July, and August. Then there is the winter vacation, which is from mid-December to mid-January every year, leaving out Christmas and New Year's in the middle, which is less than the winter vacation in China. Spring break, that is a week around Easter, can also be taken off. Finally, there is the Thanksgiving holiday, during which there is also a week's holiday. Now it is already December 19th, so naturally, these people have started to take a holiday. It's the holiday. Why don't you stay at home? What are you doing here? Glancing at the people around him, Jiang Hai asked curiously, "Is there any activity today?" Today is a friendly basketball game between our school and Winthrop High School. As the captain of the school's cheerleading team, and a member of Winthrop, I naturally have to come. And our school's John used to train with the Celtics. Today, he specially invited the current star of the Celtics, Avery and Bradley. Even if it's just to get an autograph, I must come. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girl said excitedly, "Avery Bradley?" Hearing this name, Jiang Hai can't help but frown. He also knows this person. The current starting shooting guard of the Celtics seems to be a rookie in 2010. In the year before last, he also won the best defensive lineup. He is a defensive player, and his offensive ability is very average. Recently, he has been watching NBA games at home. Because it is located in Boston, all the Boston games here are broadcasted and replayed when there are no games. let people subtly identify with the Boston Celestial Station's games. This was just like when Celestial Station only broadcast the Rockets games. Even if you didn't like the team, you would still have some affinity with them if you kept watching. So Jiang still knows about Boston. Isn't the boss of Boston Londo? When did it become him? In fact, what Jiang didn't know was that today, the NBA announced a trade. The Celtics traded Londo to the Mavericks. Yes, that's him. Hearing Jiang doubts, the girl pointed to the person who was killing everyone on the court. So it's an NBA player playing with a bunch of high school students. No wonder he crushed them. With a gentle smile, Jiang couldn't help but twitch his mouth. This NBA player is really shameless. What's the point of beating some high school students? In fact, Jiang still underestimated the shamelessness of these NBA players. For example, the current second-best player in the NBA, Kevin Durant, would go all out to play against a primary school student. Of course, this "go all out" has to be put in quotation marks. When are you guys done? Although Jiang is a basketball enthusiast, he is a fake fan. He obviously has no interest in Avery and Bradley. If it was James, Kobe or something, he might have asked for an autograph. But now forget it. That may be very late. It's just warm-ups before the game. The official game starts at 5 o'clock in the evening. According to the general basketball game's 2-hour time, it may be finished at 7 o'clock. Hearing Jiang words, the girl here counted with her fingers. Hearing his words, Jiang couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Forget it, I'll go home and sleep. It seems that today is destined to go home empty-handed. 7 o'clock in the evening? Jiang is not crazy. Hey Delia, what are you doing here? Oh, is it our Mr. Manor owner? Are you here to watch the game? At this moment, a voice suddenly came from a distance, and then a boy ran over from a distance. Jiang remembered this man. It seemed that he was with this girl. They had met once in Boston. Obviously, Jiang couldn't remember this person's specific appearance and name, but this person obviously remembered Jiang. When he saw Jiang, a trace of vigilance flashed in his eyes. Obviously, in his opinion, it was not a good thing for his beloved girl to be in contact with Jiang, this young but very rich guy, for too long. No. Hearing this person's words, and also feeling the hostility in this big boy's words, Jiang froze for a moment, and then wanted to explain. After all, he didn't mean to compete with these little brats. Since you're here, you can be considered a basketball enthusiast. Come up and play with us as a warm-up. Today's second update, continuously delivered. It was a little early today, because I have to apply for the Sanjiang list. I don't know if there is anything good to recommend next week. Chapter 91. Boys in high school were always a little chinibu. Of course, everyone had gone through that age. At this age, most boys only had 3 things to do: study, attract girls' attention, and prepare for college. Of course, for some sports students, studying was secondary. As long as they played well, there would always be a college that would want them. Therefore, attracting girls' attention was the most important thing. The boy named John was the same. This guy's family had some money. His father was a small manager in the operations department of the Celtics. Although he wasn't very rich, he had no worries. He used this reason to get a lot of tickets to the Celtics. He even joined the Celtics for training. Of course, the so-called training was just being a caddy. Sometimes, the assistant coaches and star players would give him a few pointers. It was because of this environment that he naturally had some understanding of the private lives of rich people. He didn't have a good impression of these people who liked to play with girls. When he first found out that Jiang was the owner of a manor, he only cared about Jiang. However, when he learned from Delia that Jiang's manor was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, he became a little hostile towards Jiang. The reason why he did this was also related to Delia's attitude towards Jiang. In his opinion, there was no such thing as pure friendship between men and women. Right now, Delia just didn't dislike Jiang. Who knew when they would hold hands? After all, he wasn't that old, but he was much more mature than them. Moreover, he lived alone and was a very rich man. For a little girl like Delia, he was a fatal attraction. There were countless scenes like this in American dramas. He didn't have much of a way to deal with a rich man like Jiang Hai, so he could only think of a way to deal with Delia. A fly wouldn't bite a seamless egg. If Delia's position was firm enough, Jiang Hai, the fly, wouldn't be able to do anything. Originally, he just wanted to send Delia away. However, when he saw Jiang Hai's clothes, he knew that Jiang Hai definitely wasn't here to watch the game. He also looked at Jiang Hai's height. He wasn't very tall and looked weak. This kind of person probably didn't know how to play basketball, especially when Jiang Hai hesitated and said that he wasn't here to watch the game. He was even more certain. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. He wanted to let Delia know that he was better than Jiang Hai. Therefore, he took the initiative to invite Jiang Hai to play basketball. At the same time, he retreated from the court as he spoke. "Hey, I'm not here to." Hearing this guy's words, Jiang Hai wasn't stupid. He naturally understood the meaning behind it. He just wanted to humiliate him on the basketball court. However, Jiang Hai really wasn't in the mood to play this jealous game with this kind of kid. Therefore, he was about to open his mouth to refuse, but the other party obviously didn't give him the chance to do so. "Hey everyone, quiet down. Although I'm not from Winthrop, I know that there's a big farmer in Winthrop with a net worth of over 100 million. Today the richest young man in Winthrop is here. What do you guys say? Should we let him come up and show us what he's got?" Jiang Hai was only halfway through his words when John roared. Hearing his roar, the originally lively scene instantly quieted down. Many people looked at the entrance. Jiang Hai's figure in winter clothes appeared in front of them. It's really him, the owner of Green Forest Manor? When they saw Jiang Hai, most people's eyes flashed with a trace of confusion. This was because although Jiang Hai was a rich man, he usually didn't show off. The people in town who knew him could be counted on one hand. Speaking of which, after Jiang Hai came here, the most popular thing he did was to beat up Faraday and the others and send them to prison. This was definitely not a good thing in Winthrop. Therefore, for a while, the crowd here didn't have a good first impression of Jiang Hai, but they basically maintained a neutral state. They only knew that this was a rich Huaxia man, but no one knew the specifics. Now most of these people were seeing Jiang Hai for the first time. F***ck. Seeing these people's gazes, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curse in Chinese. Is this guy crazy? I didn't provoke him, nor did I provoke him. Why is he so jealous of me? It could be said that Jiang Hai was completely uninterested in this kind of high school love triangle. He had no interest in beating up a high school student. Not all rich people were like the guy who drove a Mercedes-Benz in Initial D, who had such a bad taste. He wasn't young now. He was already 27 years old, and he was married once. He was completely uninterested in a jealous person who was almost 10 years younger than him. However, this didn't mean that he would choose to back down when someone came looking for trouble. It was like an adult strolling on the street and seeing a naughty kid causing trouble. If the kid didn't hurt him, he would at most laugh and scold him for being a naughty kid. Then he would just pass by. But now this naughty kid ran over and slapped him. He couldn't bear it anymore. If he didn't teach this kid how to behave, how could he survive in this area in the future? "I can play basketball, but I don't wear sneakers," Jiang Hai said lightly as he shrugged to John in front of him. "We can lend you some." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, John thought that Jiang Hai was just looking for excuses, so he took the initiative to speak. "Okay, size 9.5 shoes." Seeing that John was determined to make a fool of himself, Jiang Hai didn't care. Whether he could win or not was another matter, but if he just ran away, he would look down on himself. "I'll take it one step at a time. My physical fitness is so strong now. Although I haven't played basketball for a while, my performance shouldn't be too bad." Muttering in his heart, Jiang Hai walked to the sidelines. Huaxia's shoe size is based on the United Kingdoms, but in addition to the United Kingdom and Huaxia, Europe and the United States have their own shoe sizes. Jiang Hai originally wore a size 45 shoe, which is a size 9.5 shoes in the United States. When Jiang Hai walked to the bench next to him, John had already come over with a pair of Nike Hyperdunk. These shoes are also old. It looks like they should belong to a fan or a substitute of the two teams. Jiang Hai didn't care so much about these. He casually took off his shoes here, then took off his outer clothes, leaving only the hoodie he was wearing inside, then walked to the court and casually took a basketball sent by John. Jiang Hai began to dribble it. Unfortunately, since he became stronger, Jiang Hai hasn't played basketball yet. When he dribbled the ball, Jiang Hai knew that his sense of the ball was almost zero. Sure enough, after dribbling a few times, the ball hit his foot and bounced out. Ha 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 ha. At this time, everyone on the court was paying attention to Jiang Hai. Seeing that Jiang Hai couldn't even dribble the ball, these people couldn't help but laugh. Jiang Hai didn't care. After picking up the ball again, he slowly dribbled it. At this time, the 3v3 on the other side couldn't help but stop and start to pay attention to this side. When the person named Avery and Bradley saw Jiang Hai's clumsy dribble, he couldn't help but shake his head. Even some elementary school students can dribble more fluently than Jiang Hai. The reason why he chose to come today was partly because of John's request, but he also felt a little sad in his heart. Today his original big brother, Rajan Lando, was traded. Although he knew about this for a long time, it didn't mean that he could accept this fact. He felt a little sad in his heart. So when he was in a bad mood, it was also a good choice to go out and relieve his boredom. Now that he saw a rich man about to be abused, it was also a very interesting thing for him. Then he gestured to the people around him to stop playing. Then, he sat on the bench in the distance and watched the situation on the court. After Jiang Hai practiced for about 5 minutes, he felt a little more comfortable, but because his body had become too strong, he still couldn't dribble the ball easily. In other words, his consciousness still couldn't keep up with his body. For example, a computer has 128 gigabytes of memory, but the system he uses is XP. It can only recognize 2 gigabytes of memory, and the rest is useless. Jiang Hai is currently in such a state. After 5 minutes, he finally managed to dribble the ball forward without hitting his feet, but he still felt very uncomfortable. Are you done? At this time, John couldn't help but come over and ask Jiang Hai with a smile. Okay, take your time to get used to it. Hearing John's words, Jiang Hai nodded. He felt embarrassed to keep him waiting here. Then you first. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, John laughed and said to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai didn't care. He dribbled the ball directly to the 3-point line. After pushing the ball to John, John returned the ball to him. This is called washing the ball, the most basic thing in a one-on-one game. Although Jiang Hai's software can't keep up with the hardware, he still understands the rules of playing. Holding the ball, Jiang Hai began to dribble, but just as he dribbled, John over there had already snatched it. Looking at his bold way of stealing, if it was in the past, Jiang Hai couldn't say that he could pass him in an instant, but at least it wouldn't be a problem for him to protect the ball. But now he wants to protect the ball. His body reacted, but the ball didn't come over. With a tap of John's finger, the ball escaped from Jiang Hai's control, and then it was caught by John. Today's first update, 2 chapters in a row. Everyone, please support me and collect more. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.